Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Fractured Foundation. Caleb Wolf stood at the edge of the firing range, the desert sun beating down on his weathered face. At 42, his body still maintained the hardened physique of his Special Forces days, though flecks of silver had begun to invade his dark hair. 15 years had passed since he'd left Delta Force, but the skills remained, muscle memory that wouldn't fade. "You're still a damn good shot," remarked Lenny, the range owner and one of the few people Caleb considered a friend. "Military never really leaves you, does it?" Caleb ejected the magazine and set the pistol down. "Some things stick with you forever." His phone vibrated in his pocket. Tanya. Again. Their marriage had deteriorated over the past year into something unrecognizable. Gone was the woman who'd supported him through 3 tours in Afghanistan and his transition to civilian life. In her place was someone distant, irritable, and increasingly absent. "I should head home," Caleb said, gathering his gear. "Brady's having friends over today." Brady was their 16-year-old son, the one pure thing in Caleb's life. Despite the growing disconnect with Tanya, Caleb had maintained a strong relationship with Brady, teaching him everything from wilderness survival to automotive repair. Unlike his father, Brady had a gentle soul, smart, compassionate, more interested in biology than battlefield tactics. Caleb was proud of that. "Give the kid my best," Lenny called as Caleb headed toward his truck. The drive home took Caleb through River Point, a small town nestled against the mountains where he'd settled after leaving the military. He'd started a successful security consulting business, providing training to corporate clients and occasionally private protection services. The work wasn't as adrenaline-fueled as his former life, but it paid well and gave him time with his family. As he pulled into the driveway of their 2-story home, Caleb noticed Tanya's car was gone. She'd mentioned a lunch with colleagues from the real estate office where she worked, but something felt off. Her excuses for being away had multiplied lately. Work meetings, gym sessions, shopping trips with friends Caleb had never met. Brady greeted him at the door, his lanky frame leaning against the doorway. "Hey, Dad, where are those friends you were having over?" Caleb asked, setting his range bag down. Brady shrugged. "They canceled. Where's Mom?" "Work thing," Caleb replied, studying his son's expression. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." Brady hesitated. "Dad, can I ask you something?" They moved to the kitchen where Caleb grabbed 2 sodas from the refrigerator. "What's on your mind? Is everything okay between you and Mom?" Brady's eyes, so much like Tanya's, looked troubled. Caleb considered lying, but had always been straight with his son. "We're going through a rough patch. Adults sometimes do. But we'll figure it out." Brady nodded, unconvinced. "She gets a lot of calls. And texts. She always leaves the room to answer them." A cold weight settled in Caleb's stomach. He'd noticed the same behavior, but had forced himself not to jump to conclusions. Military training had taught him to gather intelligence before taking action. "I'm sure it's just work," Caleb said, not believing it himself. "There's something else," Brady added quietly. "Last week, when you were in Denver for that conference, Mom had someone over. A man. I came home early from school because of a power outage, and they were in the living room. She introduced him as Russell, a client, but they seemed close. He left really quickly after I showed up." The cold weight in Caleb's stomach hardened, but his face remained impassive, another skill from his military days. "Did she mention this Russell before?" "Never," Brady said. "And Dad? I saw the same car parked down the street yesterday. Like they were being careful not to park in front." Caleb nodded slowly. "Thanks for telling me. Don't worry about it. Okay? Adult stuff." After Brady went upstairs, Caleb sat alone at the kitchen table, his mind processing this new information with tactical precision. If Tanya was having an affair, he needed confirmation, not suspicion. In his former life, Caleb had tracked high-value targets across hostile territory. Finding out if his wife was cheating should be straightforward by comparison. When Tanya returned home that evening, Caleb watched her with new awareness. The slight flush in her cheeks, the way she avoided his eyes, the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne. Small details that separately meant nothing but together painted a damning picture. "How was your lunch?" he asked casually. "Fine." "Boring office talk," Tanya replied, busying herself with unloading groceries. "I stopped for a few things on the way home." Caleb nodded, noting another lie to add to his mental tally. "I'm taking Brady fishing this weekend. Just the two of us." "That sounds nice," she said distantly, already checking her phone. That night, as Tanya slept beside him, Caleb stared at the ceiling, his mind calculating his next moves. In Afghanistan, he had learned patience. The hasty often became the dead. Whatever was happening with Tanya, he would approach it like any mission, gather intelligence, assess the situation, and then, only then, decide how to respond. Chapter 2. Gathering Intel. The security system in the Wolf home had been Caleb's design, comprehensive but discreet. Most of the equipment was visible: door sensors, motion detectors, cameras at entry points. What Tanya didn't know was that Caleb had installed additional surveillance as a precaution, given his occasional high-profile security clients. It took him less than an hour to activate the dormant system while Tanya was at work. Small, virtually undetectable cameras and microphones in common areas of the house would feed directly to a secure server Caleb could access remotely. He felt a pang of guilt at spying on his own home, but pushed it aside. He needed facts. For 3 days, Caleb maintained his normal routine while monitoring the feeds during his work hours. Nothing unusual happened until Thursday afternoon. Tanya arrived home at 2:30, 2 hours before her usual time. 30 minutes later, a dark SUV pulled up. The man who entered their home was tall and well-dressed, with the confident bearing of someone used to getting what he wanted. Russell Mercer, according to his vehicle registration, which Caleb had already traced. 45 years old, divorced, owner of Mercer Development, a company that had been buying up commercial properties throughout the county. Caleb watched impassively as Russell embraced Tanya in their living room, their kiss removing any doubt about the nature of their relationship. The conversation that followed revealed they'd been seeing each other for nearly 7 months. 7 months of lies. "When are you going to tell him?" Russell asked, pouring himself a drink from Caleb's whiskey collection. "It's complicated," Tanya replied. "He's Brady's father, and you know his background. He was in special forces. Those men are intense." Russell laughed dismissively. "He's a security consultant now. Teaches rich executives how to avoid getting kidnapped. Not exactly Delta Force anymore." "You don't understand," Tanya insisted. "Caleb isn't like normal men. He notices things others don't. He thinks differently. If he's so observant, why hasn't he figured us out yet?" Russell pulled her closer. "Maybe he's not as sharp as he used to be." Caleb watched them move upstairs to the bedroom he shared with Tanya, but he didn't follow the feed. He'd seen enough. The laptop closed with a decisive click as he leaned back in his office chair, his face betraying no emotion while his mind cataloged every detail of what he'd witnessed. Later that evening, Caleb sat across from Tanya at dinner, studying her with new eyes. The woman who'd once been his partner in all things was now a stranger wearing his wife's face. "How was your day?" he asked, his voice casual as he passed Brady the potatoes. "Busy," Tanya replied, not meeting his gaze. "Showed properties all afternoon." Another lie to add to the collection. Caleb nodded, as if he believed her. After dinner, he retreated to his home office, ostensibly to work, but actually to conduct deeper research on Russell Mercer. What he found was illuminating. Mercer Development had a reputation for aggressive business tactics. Several smaller property owners had claimed they were pressured or threatened into selling. No charges had ever stuck, but the pattern was clear. More interesting were Russell's associates, particularly 4 men who served as his informal enforcement team. Former criminals who'd found legitimate employment with Mercer while still engaging in questionable activities on his behalf. Men like Perry Dowd, a former enforcer for a loan shark, now Mercer's head of security, and Vince Mueller, who'd done time for aggravated assault before becoming Mercer's property acquisition specialist. Caleb committed their faces to memory, a habit from his days of studying target packages before missions. He wasn't planning anything, not yet, but information was always valuable. The next day, rather than confronting Tanya, Caleb decided to expand his intelligence gathering. He placed a tracker on her car and set up surveillance on Russell Mercer's lakeside home. The property was impressive for bedrooms, private dock, expansive grounds, all surrounded by a security system that Caleb found laughably inadequate. Over the next week, a pattern emerged. Tanya would meet Russell either at his home or at a small apartment he kept in town. Twice, they met with a real estate attorney. Once, they had dinner with a couple Caleb recognized as the Harrimans, owners of the largest undeveloped lakefront property in the county, property that adjoined Caleb and Tanya's land. On the personal front, Caleb maintained his composure, playing the role of unsuspecting husband while gathering more information. He took Brady fishing as planned, using the time to subtly assess how much his son suspected. "Mom's been different lately," Brady observed as they sat in the boat, lines cast into the still water. "How so?" Caleb asked, keeping his tone conversational. Brady shrugged. "Distant. Always on her phone. And she's been asking weird questions about our property, like what we would do if we moved." This was new information. Caleb filed it away. "People go through phases, Brady. Don't worry too much. Are you guys getting divorced?" The question was blunt, typical of Brady's straightforward nature. Caleb looked at his son, seeing worry beneath the teenager's attempted nonchalance. "I don't know what's going to happen," he answered honestly. "But whatever does, you and I will be okay. That's a promise." Brady nodded, seeming satisfied with his father's candor. They spent the rest of the day discussing Brady's plans for college and his interest in marine biology, deliberately avoiding the subject of Tanya. By the end of the second week of surveillance, Caleb had compiled a comprehensive picture. Tanya was not only having an affair with Russell Mercer, but appeared to be involved in his business dealings. Specifically, she was helping him identify vulnerable properties for acquisition, using her position at the real estate firm to access non-public information. Most concerning was a conversation Caleb captured between Russell and his associate Perry Dowd, discussing the Wolf property. "His wife says he'll never sell willingly," Perry reported. "Too attached to the land. But she's working on getting her name added to the deed. Once that happens, she could sell her half, force a partition." Russell had laughed. "By then, she'll be his ex-wife. And if he becomes difficult, well, you know how to handle difficult people." The threat was clear, and it ignited something cold and focused in Caleb. He'd faced death many times during his military career. He'd looked into the eyes of men who wanted to kill him and walked away while they didn't. Russell Mercer and his associates weren't the first to underestimate him, but Caleb would ensure they learned their lesson thoroughly. That night, as he watched Tanya prepare for bed, going through the motions of their marriage, Caleb made his decision. He would not confront her. Not yet. The situation was larger than just her infidelity. If Russell Mercer and his people were willing to threaten Caleb over property, they were a danger to Brady as well. And there was nothing in this world that Caleb protected more fiercely than his son. Chapter 3. The Catalyst. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Caleb was reviewing security protocols for a new client when his phone vibrated. The school nurse's number flashed on the screen, sending a spike of adrenaline through his system. "Mr. Wolf? This is Nurse Alvarez from River Point High. Brady's had an accident. He's being transported to Memorial Hospital right now." The world narrowed to a tunnel of focused clarity. "What happened?" "He fell down a flight of stairs. He has a broken arm, possibly a concussion. He was conscious when the ambulance arrived. I'm on my way." Caleb ended the call, grabbed his keys, and was in his truck within seconds. The 20-minute drive to the hospital took 12 minutes. Caleb parked haphazardly near the emergency entrance and strode in, his presence commanding enough that the receptionist immediately directed him to Brady's location. He found his son in a curtained-off section of the ER, his left arm in a temporary cast, a bruise darkening his right cheekbone. The sight of his injured child triggered something primal in Caleb, a protective rage he carefully controlled. "Brady," he said softly, moving to his son's side. "What happened?" Brady's eyes, glassy from pain medication, focused on his father. "Dad," he said, his voice slightly slurred. "I came home for lunch. I forgot my biology textbook." Caleb frowned. Their house was a 15-minute walk from the school. Brady occasionally went home during lunch, but rarely without texting first. Mom's boyfriend was there, Brady continued, the words sending a chill through Caleb. With his friends. 4 of them. Russell, Caleb clarified, keeping his voice steady despite the fury building inside him. Brady nodded. I didn't know who they were at first. They were in the living room with Mom, looking at maps of our property. When I asked who they were, they laughed. He paused, grimacing as he shifted position. The big guy, not Russell, one of the others, said I should learn to knock. I told him it was my house. He called me a smart-ass and shoved me. I was near the top of the stairs and lost my balance. He pushed you down the stairs? Caleb's voice was dangerously quiet. Mom tried to stop it, Brady added quickly. She yelled at him, but after I fell, Russell told her to take care of me while they finished their business. She drove me to school, said the nurse could check me out, but I felt really dizzy, so they called an ambulance. Where's your mother now? She said she had to go back home to talk to Russell. Brady's eyes welled with tears. Dad, they're still at our house with Mom. I don't think she wants them there, but she seemed scared. A cold, calculating focus settled over Caleb, a state of mind his former teammates had called the wolf hunt. In combat situations, while others grew jittery or aggressive, Caleb became preternaturally calm, his thinking crystal clear, movements precise and economical. You're safe now, he assured Brady, squeezing his good hand. I'm going to talk to your doctor, then I'll take care of everything. The ER doctor confirmed Brady had a clean break of the radius, a mild concussion, and extensive bruising. He wanted to keep him overnight for observation due to the head injury. I'll be back soon, Caleb told Brady after the doctor left. You rest. Don't worry about anything. In a hospital parking lot, Caleb sat in his truck for exactly 2 minutes, formulating his approach. The old Caleb, the civilian who played by society's rules, would call the police, file a report, press charges. But that Caleb had been steadily eroding as he uncovered the extent of Tanya's betrayal, and now he was gone entirely. In his place was the man who had operated behind enemy lines, who had eliminated threats with surgical precision, who had lived by a different code, one where justice wasn't delegated but delivered personally. Caleb drove home with methodical calm. Observing that both Tanya's car and a black SUV he recognized as Russell's were in the driveway. 2 additional vehicles, a silver Audi and a red pickup, were parked on the street. For men, just as Brady had said, rather than pulling into the driveway, Caleb parked a block away and approached his property from the rear, moving through the wooded area with the silence his special forces training had instilled. From the cover of trees, he observed the house, noting positions of vehicles and cataloging potential entry points. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room offered a clear view inside. Tanya sat on the couch, her body language tense. Russell stood by the fireplace, drink in hand. 3 other men, whom Caleb identified as Perry Dowd, Vince Mueller, and a 3rd associate named Ray Cantrell, were scattered around the room. The 4th man, likely the one who'd pushed Brady, wasn't visible from this angle. Caleb circled to his workshop, a separate building behind the main house where he kept tools and equipment. Inside, he unlocked a hidden compartment in the workbench and removed a tactical vest, a combat knife, and his Glock 19 with suppressor, equipment he'd maintained but hoped never to use again. As he prepared, Caleb's mind was utterly clear. These men had entered his home. They had hurt his son. One way or another, they would pay for that transgression. Moving to the house, Caleb accessed a concealed entrance he'd built during renovations, a precaution born of paranoia that now proved prescient. The small door led to a utility space adjoining the kitchen, allowing him to enter undetected. From inside, he could hear the conversation clearly. Your kid's fine, a gruff voice was saying, likely Perry Dowd. Stop making such a big deal out of it. Kids bounce. He's in the hospital with a broken arm. Tanya responded, her voice tight. This has gone too far, Russell. I want them out of my house. Our future house, you mean, Russell replied smoothly. Once the deal goes through, this place is getting bulldozed anyway. Part of the marina expansion. I never agreed to that, Tanya protested. I told you I just want to sell my half and move to the city. A new voice, deeper than the others, spoke next. Lady, you're in too deep to start growing conscience. You signed those preliminary papers. Your husband's land is as good as ours. That's not legally binding without Caleb's signature, Tanya argued. And after what happened to Brady, he'll never. Let me worry about your husband, Russell interrupted. Travis here knows how to be persuasive. A fourth voice, Travis, presumably the man who'd pushed Brady, laughed. Military types are all the same. Act tough until you apply the right pressure, usually through the family. Caleb had heard enough. These men weren't just business associates using aggressive tactics. They were criminals who had threatened his family and injured his son. In his former life, Caleb had eliminated threats exactly like them. Men who hurt the innocent and believed themselves untouchable. He moved silently through the house, positioning himself in the hallway that connected to the living room. From there, he could see all 5 occupants clearly. Tanya on the couch, Russell by the fireplace, Perry and Vince standing near the windows, and Travis, a hulking man with a shaved head and tattoos visible beneath his shirt sleeves, lounging in Caleb's favorite chair. The sight of the man who had hurt Brady sitting there, smirking in the home Caleb had built, crystallized his resolve. These men had made a fatal error in judgment. They had assumed that because Caleb had left his military life behind, he was no longer dangerous. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Caleb stepped into the living room, his movements so sudden and silent that it took several seconds for anyone to notice his presence. Tanya saw him first, her eyes widening in shock. "Caleb," she gasped. "What are you?" "Brady's in hospital with a broken arm and a concussion," he said, his voice eerily calm. "He told me everything." Russell recovered quickly, adopting a conciliatory tone. "Look, Caleb, there was an unfortunate accident. Travis here got a little overzealous, but no real harm." "No real harm," Caleb repeated, his gaze shifting to Travis, who had risen from the chair and was eyeing Caleb with the misplaced confidence of a man who relied on his size for intimidation. "My son is in the hospital. Your wife invited us here," Travis said with a smirk. "Maybe you should control your woman better." Caleb's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes caused Travis's smirk to falter. "I want all of you out of my house," Caleb stated calmly. "Now." Perry Dowd stepped forward, hand moving toward his jacket. "That's not how this is going to work, Wolf. We have business with your wife, and you're interrupting." What happened next occurred so quickly that later, Tanya would have difficulty describing it coherently. Caleb moved toward Perry with a speed that seemed impossible, deflecting his attempt to draw a weapon and driving a precise strike to his throat. Perry collapsed, gasping for air through a crushed windpipe. Vince and Travis responded immediately, both reaching for weapons. Caleb's Glock appeared in his hand, as if by magic, 2 suppressed shots finding their targets before either man could clear their holsters. Vince fell with a bullet in his chest. Travis took a round to the thigh and stumbled, cursing. Russell had backed against the fireplace, his face a mask of shock. "What the fuck? You're insane." Caleb ignored him, addressing Tanya instead. "Get out." "Caleb, please," she began, her voice trembling. "I can explain." "Get out." He didn't raise his voice, but the command in his tone was unmistakable. "Go to the hospital. Stay with our son." Tanya hesitated only briefly before grabbing her purse and fleeing the house, leaving Russell and his remaining associates to face Caleb alone. As the door closed behind her, Caleb surveyed the room with cold detachment. Perry on the floor, struggling for breath he wouldn't find. Vince motionless, blood pooling beneath him. Travis clutching his wounded leg, fear replacing bravado in his eyes. And Russell Mercer, the man who had seduced Caleb's wife, plotted to steal his land, and brought men into his home who had hurt his son. Russell, who was now realizing the magnitude of his miscalculation. "You can't do this," Russell said, his confident demeanor crumbling. "You can't just kill people. There are laws. For men enter my home today," Caleb stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "For men who injure my son and threaten my family." He moved toward Russell with the measured pace of a predator who knows its prey can't escape. None of them are leaving alive. Chapter 4. Cleaning House. The aftermath required precision and focus. Caleb worked methodically, his movements economical, his mind clear. In his former life, he had sometimes been tasked with ensuring operations left no trace. Those skills, dormant for years, returned with practiced ease. Travis had been the last to die, begging for his life even as Caleb questioned him about Russell's operation, extracting valuable intelligence about properties, partners, and plans. The man had been pathetically eager to betray his employer in a futile attempt to save himself. By nightfall, all evidence that Russell Mercer and his associates had ever visited the Wolf residence had been eliminated. Their vehicles were gone, relocated to a long-term parking facility at the regional airport. Their phones had been disposed of separately, batteries removed. And the men themselves? The abandoned iron mine outside of town had shafts that descended hundreds of feet into darkness. It had claimed the lives of 19 miners in its operational history. Now it claimed 4 more. Caleb returned home and meticulously cleaned the house, removing all traces of blood and gunpowder residue. The security footage from his hidden system was downloaded to an encrypted drive and the originals erased. By midnight, the house was immaculate, showing no signs of the violence that had occurred hours earlier. Only then did he shower, change, and drive to the hospital. He found Tanya in the waiting room outside Brady's room, her face pale, eyes red from crying. "The doctor says he's sleeping," she said as Caleb approached. "They gave him something for the pain." Caleb nodded, regarding his wife with detached interest. The woman he had loved for 18 years now seemed like a stranger. Or perhaps he was finally seeing what had always been there beneath the surface. "What happened to them?" Tanya asked quietly, glancing around to ensure no one could overhear. "You don't want to know?" Caleb replied. "And if anyone asks, you left them at the house with me and don't know where they went. They're dead, aren't they?" It wasn't really a question. Caleb didn't respond, which was answer enough. Tanya covered her mouth, stifling a sob. This wasn't supposed to happen. None of it. Russell said it was just business, that no one would get hurt. Brady got hurt. That was an accident. Travis has always been a hothead, but Russell never wanted. "Stop talking," Caleb interrupted, his voice low. "I don't care what Russell wanted. I don't care what you wanted. All that matters now is Brady." Tanya fell silent, her gaze dropping to the floor. After a moment, she asked, "What happens now?" "Now we act like a concerned mother and father whose son had an accident at school," Caleb said evenly. "Nothing else happened today. Russell and his associates are just people you've met through work. If they don't show up for a while, that's not unusual or concerning. And us." Tanya's voice was barely audible. "What about us, Caleb?" Caleb studied her, seeing not the young woman he'd married, but someone corrupted by greed and selfishness. Someone who had been willing to betray not just him, but their son. "There is no us anymore," he stated simply. "But for Brady's sake, we'll maintain appearances until he's recovered. Then we'll divorce quietly. You'll get a fair settlement, enough to start over somewhere else. Somewhere far from here. You're just discarding me?" Anger flashed through her fear. "After 18 years, you discarded us when you started sleeping with Russell," Caleb replied without heat. "When you plotted to take my land. When you brought men into our home who hurt our son." Before she could respond, a nurse approached to tell them Brady was awake and asking for his parents. The conversation ended there, but the message was clear. Tanya had made her choice, and now Caleb had made his. In Brady's hospital room, Caleb settled into the chair beside the bed while Tanya nervously hovered near the door. "Hey, kiddo," Caleb said gently. "How's the arm?" "Hurts," Brady admitted. "But the drugs are pretty good." His gaze shifted between his parents, sensing the tension. "What happened? Did you go home, Dad?" "I did," Caleb confirmed. "Had a talk with Mr. Mercer and his friends. They won't be bothering us again." Brady's eyes widened slightly. "What did you do?" "Just talked," Caleb assured him, though something in his expression made Brady study him more closely. Some men only understand certain kinds of conversations. Tanya interjected, her voice artificially bright. "The important thing is that you're okay, Brady. The doctor says you can probably go home tomorrow." Brady nodded, still watching his father. At 16, he wasn't naive. He had grown up hearing stories about his father's military service. carefully sanitized versions, but enough to know Caleb Wolf wasn't a man to be crossed. "Get some rest," Caleb told him, squeezing his good hand. "I'll be right here all night." After Brady drifted back to sleep, Tanya whispered that she was going home to change clothes. Caleb acknowledged this with a nod, not bothering to look at her. As far as he was concerned, their marriage had ended the moment he'd watched her with Russell through the security feed. Alone with his sleeping son, Caleb allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had killed before, during his military service. Those deaths had been sanctioned by his country, part of operations targeting enemy combatants. Today had been different, a personal choice to eliminate men who threatened his family. He searched himself for remorse or doubt and found none. These men had entered his home, injured his son, and made it clear they intended further harm. In the natural world, such actions against a predator's offspring typically resulted in only one outcome. Humans had created laws and social constraints that suppressed these natural responses, but beneath the veneer of civilization, certain truths remained. Don't threaten what a man holds dear unless you're prepared for the consequences. The next day, Brady was discharged with instructions for follow-up care. During the drive home, Caleb outlined a modified version of what had happened. "Mr. Mercer and his associates won't be coming around anymore," he explained. "Your mother and I had a long talk with them. They understood that their business proposals weren't welcome." "Is that why Mom's been crying?" Brady asked perceptively. Caleb glanced at his son. "Your mother and I have been having problems for a while. You've noticed that. What happened yesterday brought things to a head. We'll be separating soon." Brady absorbed this information in silence, then asked, "Is it because she was seeing that Russell guy?" "You knew." Brady shrugged his good shoulder. "I'm not a little kid, Dad. I've seen how she acts, always on her phone, making excuses to leave. And that day I came home and found him there. It was pretty obvious." Caleb nodded, impressed yet again by his son's perceptiveness. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that." "It's not your fault," Brady said firmly. "Mom made her choices." "She's still your mother," Caleb reminded him. "Whatever happens between us doesn't change that." Brady looked out the window. "Will I stay with you? After the divorce? If that's what you want." "It is." The simple declaration warmed something in Caleb's chest, a reminder of why he had done what he did. Not just to punish those who had harmed his son, but to protect Brady's future. The following days established a new normal. Tanya moved into the guest room, maintaining the facade of a concerned wife and mother, while privately making arrangements for her departure. Caleb assisted Brady with homework and daily activities limited by his caste, all while monitoring news reports and police bulletins for any mention of Russell Mercer or his associates. As expected, their disappearance was noted, first by business associates, then by authorities. Russell had been a prominent figure in local development, after all. His sudden absence, along with that of his key employees, raised questions. Caleb observed the investigation with clinical detachment. The men's vehicles being found at the airport created an initial theory that they had left town, possibly due to financial troubles or legal issues that subsequent investigation began to uncover. Russell's business dealings, it seemed, had involved numerous illegalities that were now coming to light in his absence. The consensus among law enforcement was that Russell and his associates had fled to avoid prosecution. International credit card activity, carefully orchestrated by Caleb using information extracted from Travis, supported this theory, creating a trail that led to Mexico and then overseas. While this investigation progressed, Caleb focused on the next phase of his plan. He had eliminated the immediate threat, but there were loose ends to tie up, particularly regarding Russell's business partners and the shadowy investors behind his development projects. Travis's final confessions had revealed an operation larger than just Russell's ambitions. There were powerful interests involved, people who had funded Russell's property acquisitions with the goal of developing the entire lakefront into a resort complex. People who might notice Russell's disappearance and send others to continue his work. People who might still pose a threat to Caleb and Brady. Caleb had no intention of waiting to find out. In warfare, the successful strategist seized the initiative rather than reacting to enemy movements. He would identify these hidden players and neutralize the threat they posed permanently. The hunter was on the move, and his prey had no idea they were being stalked. Chapter 5. Following the Money. The offices of Mercer Development occupied the entire fifth floor of River Point's only high-rise building. The space featured contemporary design, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a reception area meant to impress potential investors. At 2:17 a.m., however, the only illumination came from the dim emergency lighting and the small flashlight Caleb used to navigate his way to Russell's private office. Security had been minimal. A standard alarm system Caleb had disabled in under 3 minutes, and a night guard who patrolled the building's perimeter once an hour with clockwork predictability. The lock on Russell's office door took slightly longer, its biometric component requiring specialized equipment Caleb had acquired from contacts in his security consulting business. Once inside, Caleb moved efficiently. The computer would be monitored and possibly remotely accessed by whatever organization had backed Russell's operations. Instead, Caleb focused on a small safe concealed behind an original Wyeth landscape, the combination for which he had extracted from Travis during their brief but productive interrogation. Inside the safe, Caleb found what he sought: an external hard drive, a ledger with handwritten notes, and a series of documents outlining the true ownership structure of Mercer Development. These items went into his bag, along with selected files from Russell's desk that Travis had identified as important. As he prepared to leave, Caleb noticed a framed photograph on Russell's desk. Russell standing beside a distinguished-looking older man on a golf course, both smiling confidently at the camera. Caleb recognized the older man immediately: Charles Beaumont, the region's wealthiest resident and a major political donor whose name adorned hospital wings and university buildings. According to the information from Travis, Beaumont was more than just a prominent citizen. He was the primary investor behind the Lakefront Development Project, with connections to state officials who had expedited permits and rezoning applications. Russell had been his frontman, the public face who handled the messy details while Beaumont remained at a clean distance. Caleb pocketed the photograph and exited the office, leaving no trace of his presence. His next stop was Russell's apartment in town, the one he had used for meetings with Tanya and others he wanted to keep separate from his public life. The apartment yielded additional intelligence: a laptop not connected to Mercer Development systems, financial records for offshore accounts, and a burner phone with contact numbers for individuals not in Russell's public address book. Most valuable was a calendar detailing upcoming meetings, including one scheduled for 3 days later at Beaumont's estate with representatives from a foreign investment group. By dawn, Caleb had compiled enough information to understand the full scope of the operation that had targeted his land. The lakefront development was merely the public-facing portion of a larger scheme involving water rights acquisition, mineral leases, and infrastructure contracts worth hundreds of millions. The project had attracted investment from a consortium with ties to organized crime, using shell companies and local proxies like Russell to maintain deniability. The technical term for such operations, Caleb knew, was strategic corruption, the systematic compromise of local governance and regulatory frameworks to enable large-scale extraction of resources and profits. He had seen similar patterns in developing nations during his military career, usually involving warlords and multinational corporations. The principles remained the same even in small-town America: identify valuable resources, corrupt or control local officials, and extract maximum profit while externalizing costs to the community. Caleb's property, with its extensive lakefront access and unique position at the center of the planned development, had been a key acquisition target. Without it, the project's viability was significantly reduced, which explained why Russell and his backers had been willing to resort to threats and intimidation. The question now was how to proceed. The organization behind Russell was larger and more sophisticated than a few local thugs. Charles Beaumont had political connections, private security, and the resources to cause significant problems for anyone who opposed him. A direct confrontation would be unwise. In the military, Caleb had learned that asymmetric warfare required identifying critical vulnerabilities rather than attacking strength directly. He needed to find Beaumont's weak points, the exposure he couldn't afford, the pressure points that would force him to abandon the project. The answer began to emerge as Caleb reviewed the financial documents from Russell's laptop. The development project relied on a complex structure of loans, investments, and advance payments that created significant leverage. Beaumont had overextended himself, betting heavily on the project's success to offset mounting gambling debts and investment losses elsewhere. More importantly, the foreign investors were not people who tolerated failure or excuses. Their latest capital injection came with specific performance requirements and deadlines. Russell's sudden disappearance had already created complications. Any further delays or obstacles would trigger clauses that could be financially devastating for Beaumont. Caleb allowed himself a small, cold smile. He had found the vulnerability. That afternoon, while Tanya took Brady to a follow-up medical appointment, Caleb used Russell's burner phone to send messages to key contacts, including Charles Beaumont. The messages, seemingly from Russell, cited unforeseen complications and postponed the upcoming meeting with the foreign investors. Additional messages to financial partners requested patience regarding certain payments and commitments. The response was immediate and revealing. Beaumont called the burner phone repeatedly, leaving increasingly agitated voicemails demanding Russell contact him immediately. Other partners sent terse messages expressing concern and, in some cases, barely veiled threats. Caleb observed this reaction with clinical interest. He had created uncertainty, and uncertainty was often more destabilizing than direct opposition. Now, he needed to apply additional pressure at strategic points. The next morning, anonymized information about the development project's environmental impact, conveniently detailed in Russell's files, was delivered to both the State Environmental Protection Agency and a prominent environmental advocacy group. By afternoon, preliminary inquiries were underway, and local news outlets had begun reporting on potential wetlands violations associated with the proposed development. Simultaneously, Caleb used his legitimate security consulting business to approach the Foreign Investment Group's regional representative, offering specialized due diligence services for their American investments. The representative, impressed by Caleb's credentials and military background, agreed to meet. The meeting took place at an upscale restaurant in the nearest city. Caleb presented himself as a concerned professional who had noticed irregularities in the lakefront development project while conducting research for another client. I believe your investors may not have received complete information regarding certain regulatory and financial aspects of the project, Caleb explained, sliding a folder across the table. These documents suggest significant undisclosed liabilities. The representative, a sharp-eyed woman named Helena Vasquez, reviewed the materials with practiced efficiency. These are internal documents, she noted. May I ask how you obtained them? I have sources, Caleb replied simply. The important question is whether your principals would prefer to learn about these issues now, from a discreet third party, or later, when regulatory agencies and journalists are involved. Helena studied him carefully. What is your interest in this matter, Mr. Wolf? Are you seeking compensation for this information? I'm seeking the termination of the project, Caleb stated bluntly. My property adjoins the proposed development site. My family has been threatened by individuals associated with the project. My son was injured as a result. I see. Helena's expression revealed nothing. And you believe approaching us directly is the most effective strategy? I believe your organization values efficiency and dislikes unnecessary complications, Caleb replied. Continuing to back this project will create significant complications. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Helena finally nodded. I will convey your concerns to my principals. They will make their own determination. Of course, Caleb agreed. I should mention that similar information has been provided to other interested parties as a contingency measure. Any aggressive response would trigger wider disclosure. This time, Helena smiled thinly. You have military experience, I understand. I do. It shows. She closed the folder and stood. Expect a response within 48 hours. True to her word, the response came, not directly to Caleb, but through observable actions. Within 2 days, the Foreign Investment Group announced it was withdrawing from several American development projects, citing reassessment of market conditions. Charles Beaumont's name appeared in financial news stories discussing the impact of this withdrawal on regional development plans. More telling was the private security detail that suddenly appeared around Beaumont's estate. Not his usual personnel, but professional operatives with the bearing of men with serious training. Beaumont was scared, increasing his protection while simultaneously trying to salvage his financial position. Caleb monitored these developments while maintaining his normal routine, working with clients, helping Brady with his recovery, and coexisting with Tanya in their increasingly silent home. She had secured an apartment in the city and was preparing to move once Brady's arm had healed enough for him to be more independent. The pressure on Beaumont continued to build. Environmental regulators had placed a temporary hold on all development activity pending their investigation. Local news coverage had expanded to include questions about how certain permits had been approved despite clear regulatory conflicts. And the foreign investors' withdrawal had triggered loan covenants that required immediate repayment of significant sums. Caleb knew that cornered predators were the most dangerous. Beaumont would be looking for ways to salvage the situation, potentially including identifying and eliminating the source of his troubles. The increased security around his estate suggested he anticipated retaliation, possibly from the foreign investors, but perhaps also from whoever had exposed his operations. This suited Caleb perfectly. Let Beaumont huddle behind his guards, jumping at shadows. The psychological pressure of waiting for an attack that might come from any direction at any time was its own form of punishment, one Caleb had employed against enemy commanders in his former life. But psychological pressure was just the beginning. Caleb had no intention of allowing Beaumont to recover, regroup, and potentially pose a future threat. The man had authorized actions that led to Brady's injury. That debt would be paid in full. The opportunity presented itself sooner than expected. Among Russell's contacts was a woman named Sophia Green, whose text messages suggested a personal relationship with Beaumont despite her official role as his executive assistant. According to the messages, Beaumont's wife was away visiting family on the East Coast, and Sophia was staying at the estate, specifically in the guest house by the pool, away from the main residence where the security detail was concentrated. Caleb formulated his approach carefully. Direct infiltration of the estate would be challenging given the increased security. Instead, he would use Sophia as his entry point, not physically but informationally. A background check revealed that Sophia had a younger brother with a history of drug-related offenses currently on probation, a weakness Caleb could exploit without hesitation. The following evening, Sophia received an anonymous text with photographs, her brother meeting with a known drug dealer, clearly violating his probation terms. The accompanying message was simple: pool house, midnight, come alone or these go to his probation officer. At 11:58 p.m., security cameras showed Sophia leaving the main house and walking nervously toward the pool house, checking her phone repeatedly. At midnight exactly, she received another text. Inside the pool house. Door unlocked. Sophia hesitated visibly before entering the darkened building. Once inside, she found not a person but a laptop open on the table, its screen showing a video call interface. When she approached, the call connected automatically. "Ms. Green," Caleb said, his face visible only in partial shadow. "Thank you for joining me." "Who are you?" she demanded, fear and anger mingling in her voice. "What do you want?" "Information," Caleb replied calmly, "about Charles Beaumont and his connection to Russell Mercer." Sophia glanced nervously toward the door. "I can't talk about that. Charles has security everywhere since Russell disappeared." "Since Russell disappeared," Caleb repeated, an interesting choice of words. Not since Russell left, or since Russell went to Mexico. "You believe something happened to him." "I don't know anything about that," she insisted, but her expression betrayed uncertainty. "I think you know more than you're admitting," Caleb countered. "About Russell, about the development project, about the foreign investors. About what happened to my son." Sophia's eyes widened slightly. "Your son, Brady Wolfe, 16 years old, pushed down a flight of stairs by one of Russell's associates in my home. My home that your boss wanted to acquire for his development." Understanding dawned on Sophia's face. You're Caleb Wolf, the property owner Russell couldn't buy out. The one whose wife he was sleeping with, Caleb added dispassionately. The one whose son was injured. The one who wants to ensure Charles Beaumont understands the consequences of those actions. Sophia swallowed hard. What do you want from me? As I said, information. In exchange, your brother's indiscretions remain private. For the next 30 minutes, Sophia provided details far more valuable than anything in Russell's files. Beaumont's private schedule, the rotation pattern of his security detail, the layout of his estate, including entry points and blind spots in the surveillance system. Most importantly, his secure room, a reinforced space where he retreated when feeling particularly vulnerable. He's been sleeping there since Russell disappeared, Sophia revealed. He has a panic button that alerts a private security firm with a response time under 5 minutes. Caleb absorbed this information, constructing and discarding tactical approaches in his mind. One last question, Ms. Green. Does Beaumont deserve what's coming to him? Sophia hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. Then something hardened in her eyes. He told Russell to make an example of anyone who wouldn't sell. Said to target the family if necessary. Well, I heard about that boy getting hurt. I almost quit. But you didn't, Caleb observed. No, she admitted quietly. I didn't. Thank you for your honesty. Caleb reached to end the call, then paused. The photos of your brother have been deleted. Make better choices than your employer, Ms. Green. The screen went dark, leaving Sophia alone in the pool house with the knowledge that Charles Beaumont's days were numbered. Chapter 6. Smoke and Mirrors. Charles Beaumont prided himself on being a man who controlled his environment. His estate, set on 20 acres of prime lakefront property, had been designed to project both power and security, a modern fortress disguised as a luxury residence. The events of the past week, however, had transformed this sanctuary into a prison of anxiety. Russell's disappearance had been concerning but manageable. The subsequent withdrawal of the foreign investors had been a significant setback. The regulatory investigation was a growing problem. But the most disturbing development was the sense that someone was methodically dismantling everything he had built, moving with precision and purpose toward an unstated but ominous goal. Beaumont's security team had doubled, then tripled. His daily schedule had been restricted to essential movements only. His communications were routed through secure channels. Yet none of these precautions had alleviated the crawling sensation between his shoulder blades, the feeling of being watched, studied, and measured for retribution. On the 7th day after Russell's disappearance, Beaumont received a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, Russell Mercer standing beside him on the golf course, with 4 faces circled in red: Russell, Perry, Vince, and Travis. Across the bottom, written in black marker, were 6 words: "From men entered. None left alive." The implication was unambiguous. Beaumont immediately summoned his head of security, a former military contractor named Decker, and showed him the photograph. "Find out who sent this," Beaumont demanded, his voice tightly controlled despite his internal panic. "And increase security. No one enters the property without full identification and verification." Decker studied the photograph, his expression grim. "This looks like a death notification, sir. And a threat." "I'm aware of what it is," Beaumont snapped. "What I want to know is who sent it and what they want." "The phrasing suggests military," Decker observed. "The clarity of purpose, the directness. No demands, just a statement of fact and an implied warning." Beaumont paced the secure room where he now spent most of his time. "This has to be connected to the Wolf property. Russell said there was a problem with the owner, but assured me it was being handled." "What kind of problem?" "The man refused to sell. Russell was working on his wife instead. Apparently, she was amenable to the right incentives." Beaumont waved dismissively. The details weren't important as long as Russell delivered results. Decker's expression suggested he found this approach short-sighted. "Do you have information on this property owner? Background, employment, potential capabilities?" Beaumont retrieved his tablet and pulled up a file. "Caleb Wolf, 42, owns a security consulting business. Prior to that, Military service. Army, I believe. What kind of military service? Decker asked, his interest visibly sharpening. Does it matter? He teaches corporate executives how to avoid kidnapping. Hardly relevant to our situation. Decker took the tablet and scrolled through the file. His expression changed as he read further. Sir, this isn't just military service. Caleb Wolf was Delta Force, Tier 1 Special Operations, deployed to Afghanistan and other locations classified, even in this background check. Multiple commendations, details redacted. Beaumont dismissed this with a wave. That was years ago. He's a civilian now. With all due respect, sir, men like that don't ever truly become civilians, Decker countered. The training, the mindset, it stays with them. And if something happened to trigger a return to operational thinking. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that if Russell or his people did something to provoke this man, particularly involving his family, we may be dealing with a significantly more dangerous situation than you realize. Beaumont sank into his chair, the implications settling over him. You think Wolf eliminated Russell and his team? That's murder. Multiple murders. In his mind, it might be something else entirely, Decker said carefully. Special operations personnel are trained to identify and neutralize threats with extreme prejudice. If he perceived Russell's team as a threat to his family. So what do? We need more information, Decker decided. I'll have the team investigate any connection between Wolf and Russell's disappearance. In the meantime, we maintain maximum security protocols. What neither man knew was that their conversation was being monitored. The secure room had been compromised 3 days earlier when an apparent maintenance technician, actually an associate of Caleb's from his military days, had installed specialized surveillance equipment while updating the estate security systems. Caleb listened to their discussion from a nondescript van parked at a scenic overlook a mile from Beaumont's estate. The mention of his military background brought a grim smile to his face. Decker was right about one thing. Certain training never fully reseeded, merely waiting beneath the surface for circumstances that required its application. The next phase of Caleb's plan involved creating distractions that would fragment Beaumont's attention and resources. The first came that evening, when an anonymous tip led police to search an abandoned warehouse owned by one of Beaumont's shell companies. They discovered evidence suggesting it had been used for illegal activities connected to the development project. Nothing conclusive enough for immediate arrests, but sufficient to warrant further investigation. The second distraction arrived the following morning. A detailed dossier on Beaumont's tax manipulations and regulatory violations was delivered to the regional office of the IRS. By afternoon, preliminary inquiries were underway, with notifications sent to Beaumont's legal team requesting extensive documentation. The third and most effective distraction targeted Beaumont's reputation directly. Carefully selected communications from Russell's files, authenticated and containing Beaumont's explicit instructions regarding coercive tactics against property owners, were provided to a journalist known for investigating corruption in real estate development. The resulting article, published online with promises of further revelations to come, created immediate ripples through Beaumont's social and business circles. Each of these actions forced Beaumont to divide his attention and resources, directing some of his security personnel to manage the growing threats to his freedom and fortune rather than focusing exclusively on his physical protection. More importantly, they increased his stress and sense of being besieged from all sides, psychological pressure that would inevitably lead to mistakes. While Beaumont scrambled to contain these various crises, Caleb prepared for direct action. The intelligence gathered from Sophia Green had provided a comprehensive understanding of the estate's security measures and vulnerabilities. The surveillance of Beaumont's secure room had yielded additional insights about his movements and habits. The most valuable information, however, came from an unexpected source. Decker, the security chief, had begun his own investigation into Caleb's background and activities. This included contacting former military personnel who had served with him, seeking insights into his capabilities and potential strategies. One of those contacts was Alex Reeves, who had indeed served with Caleb in Afghanistan. and who remained a trusted associate. Instead of providing accurate information about Caleb's likely approach, Alex fed Decker carefully crafted misinformation, suggesting that Caleb, if responsible for Russell's disappearance, would likely follow a specific tactical doctrine that emphasized direct confrontation after systematic isolation of the target. Armed with this intelligence, Decker repositioned his security assets to defend against the anticipated approach. In doing so, he inadvertently created openings in other areas, openings Caleb had identified and planned to exploit. The final element fell into place when Beaumont's wife announced she was extending her East Coast visit indefinitely, having read the news reports about her husband's alleged activities. This further destabilized Beaumont emotionally, making him more erratic and less methodical in his security protocols. 3 days later, at precisely 2:17 a.m., the dead zone and human alertness when night shift personnel were at their lowest functional capacity, Caleb initiated his approach to the estate. Rather than attempting to defeat the sophisticated perimeter security directly, he utilized the property's drainage system, a series of large pipes that channeled water from the higher portions of the estate to the lake. These drainage pipes, installed during the original construction and predating the current security systems, provided access to the grounds near the pool house. From there, Caleb moved through the property using blind spots in the surveillance coverage that Sophia had identified, his movements timed to coincide with the patrol patterns of the security team. Reaching the main house required neutralizing 2 guards, not fatally, but with sufficient efficiency to ensure they remained unconscious for the duration of his mission. Both men were disabled with precisely applied pressure to carotid arteries, restricting blood flow to the brain long enough to render them unconscious without permanent harm. Inside the house, Caleb navigated to the east wing where Beaumont's secure room was located. The room itself presented a significant challenge: reinforced walls, a hardened door with biometric locks, and direct connection to an emergency response system. According to Decker's security protocols, any attempt to breach the room would trigger an immediate armed response. Caleb had no intention of breaching the room. Instead, he accessed the environmental control system for that section of the house, a separate panel located in a utility closet nearby. From there, he was able to introduce a colorless, odorless gas into the ventilation system serving the secure room. The gas, a non-lethal, incapacitating agent developed for hostage rescue scenarios, would render Beaumont unconscious within minutes of exposure. The room's air filtration system, designed to protect against conventional chemical threats, wasn't calibrated to detect or remove this particular compound. While waiting for the gas to take effect, Caleb disabled the direct line to the security company and looped the surveillance footage of the secure room, creating the appearance that Beaumont was sleeping normally. When sufficient time had elapsed, he bypassed the biometric locks using techniques developed for covert entry operations during his military service. Inside the secure room, he found Charles Beaumont unconscious on the bed, his breathing shallow but stable. Caleb efficiently secured him with restraints, covered his mouth with specialized tape that allowed breathing but prevented speech, and administered a mild sedative to ensure continued unconsciousness during transport. Exiting the estate proved simpler than entering. Beaumont, wrapped in a body bag similar to those used by high-end security teams for emergency evacuations, was carried by Caleb directly through the front entrance. The 2 guards stationed there, having received an apparent authorization code from Decker via their communication system, allowed the presumed security specialist to load the package into an unmarked vehicle identical to those used by Beaumont's security team. By dawn, Charles Beaumont found himself regaining consciousness in an unfamiliar location, a small, windowless room with concrete walls reminiscent of a cold storage facility. His hands were secured to the chair where he sat, and across from him, watching with detached interest, was Caleb Wolfe. "Mr. Beaumont," Caleb acknowledged as Beaumont's eyes focused. "Welcome back." Beaumont attempted to speak, found his mouth uncooperatively dry, and settled for glaring at his captor. "You're wondering what this is about," Caleb continued conversationally. "Why you here? What I want from you?" He leaned forward slightly. "It's quite simple, really. Your associate Russell Mercer seduced my wife. He brought men into my home who injure my son, all in service to your development project. Beaumont swallowed with difficulty. I never authorized. You told Russell to make an example of anyone who wouldn't sell, Caleb interrupted. You said to target the family if necessary. Your words, Mr. Beaumont, recorded in Russell's meticulous notes. That was just business talk, Beaumont protested weakly. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. My son has a broken arm and a concussion, Caleb stated, his voice remaining eerily calm. He was pushed down a staircase in his own home by men you employed. Men you directed to pressure my family. Beaumont's eyes darted around the room, seeking some escape or advantage. Finding none, he attempted a different approach. What do you want? Money? I can pay whatever you're asking. I'm not interested in your money, Caleb replied. What I want is your complete withdrawal from the lakefront development project, the dissolution of all related business entities, your permanent departure from the region, and a very generous contribution to my son's college fund. That's millions in losses, Beaumont sputtered. Years of planning, investments. The alternative, Caleb interrupted smoothly, is less pleasant. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Beaumont studied Caleb's expression, searching for any sign of bluff or uncertainty. Finding none, he asked, what happened to Russell and his men? What do you think happened? Caleb countered. Beaumont swallowed hard. You killed them. For men enter my home, Caleb confirmed without emotion. Men who threaten my family and injure my son. None of them left alive. The blunt admission seemed to drain what little resistance remained in Beaumont. You'll never get away with this. Kidnapping, murder, you're talking about serious crimes. I'm talking about consequences, Caleb corrected. Something men like you and Russell believe you're immune to. You move through the world taking what you want, hurting whoever stands in your way, secure in the belief that your money and connections protect you from repercussions. He leaned closer. But some lines shouldn't be crossed, Mr. Beaumont. Threatening a man's family is one of them. What's to stop me from going to the police as soon as you release me? Beaumont challenged, a last flicker of defiance. Caleb smiled thinly. Several things. First, the extensive evidence of your criminal activities that has already been provided to various authorities. Second, the additional evidence I've gathered about your personal indiscretions, which I'm certain your wife and business associates would find fascinating. He paused, allowing this to sink in. And finally, the simple fact that if you choose that path, I will find you again. And our next conversation won't be nearly this civilized. Beaumont stared at him, seeming to truly see the man before him for the first time. Not just a property owner who refused to sell, but a trained operator with both the capability and willingness to eliminate threats permanently. What guarantee do I have that you'll let me go if I agree? He asked finally. You have my word, Caleb replied, which, unlike yours, actually means something. Hours later, a series of legal documents were delivered to Caleb's home by courier. They detailed the complete dissolution of the lakefront development project, Beaumont's divestment from all related business interests, and the establishment of a substantial educational trust for Brady Wolfe. Accompanying the papers was a brief note. I'm relocating to Arizona, effective immediately. Our business is concluded. Charles Beaumont was released that evening at a rest stop 50 miles outside of town, disoriented but physically unharmed. By morning, he had indeed departed the region, leaving behind a collapsing business empire and a community full of unanswered questions about Russell Mercer's disappearance. For Caleb, these outcomes were secondary to the primary objective, ensuring his son's safety. With both Russell and Beaumont removed as threats, Brady could heal and continue his life without looking over his shoulder. The cost, in moral terms, in legal risk, in the coldly calculated elimination of threats, was one Caleb accepted without reservation. Some would call it vigilante justice. Caleb considered it the natural response of a predator protecting its offspring. The distinction was academic. What mattered was that those who had threatened his family now understood the fatal error of their calculation. Nobody touches his boy and walks away. Chapter 7. The Price of Blood. The dissolution of Beaumont's development project sent ripples through River Point. Property values stabilized after weeks of speculative fluctuation. Businesses that had positioned themselves to capitalize on the expected influx of tourists and wealthy second-home owners adjusted their plans. Local officials who had expedited permits and rezoning applications suddenly found themselves subject to increased scrutiny from state regulatory agencies. Throughout these community-wide adjustments, Caleb maintained his normal routine. He met with clients, advised on security protocols, and spent evenings helping Brady with homework and rehabilitation exercises for his injured arm. To outward appearances, he was simply a concerned father focused on his son's recovery while navigating the end of his marriage. Internally, Caleb conducted a meticulous assessment of his actions and their potential consequences. He had eliminated 5 men, Russell and his associates directly, Beaumont as a threat though not physically. The bodies of the 4 men would likely never be found, having been secured in the abandoned mine shaft with careful attention to ensuring they remained undetectable. Beaumont had powerful incentives to maintain silence about his abduction and the events leading to his departure from the region. The potential weak links were Tanya and Sophia Green. Tanya knew some of what had occurred, but not the full extent of Caleb's actions. Her complicity in the aftermath, her silence about the men's visit to their home on the day of Brady's injury, made her an unlikely source of information for authorities. Additionally, her own involvement with Russell and the planned property scheme gave her strong motivation to avoid scrutiny. Sophia Green presented a different calculation. She had provided crucial information about Beaumont's security arrangements, but had no direct knowledge of what Caleb had done with that information. Her assistance had been motivated by her own moral qualms about Beaumont's business practices and the harm to Brady. Still, she represented a potential vulnerability in Caleb's operational security. Both women warranted monitoring, but not immediate action. Caleb established discreet surveillance on Sophia while maintaining careful observation of Tanya's activities within their increasingly separate lives. The more immediate concern was Brady. The boy was perceptive and had already connected certain dots regarding the disappearance of Russell and his associates. During a fishing trip 3 weeks after Beaumont's departure, Brady broached the subject directly. "Those men who were at our house," he began, carefully baiting his hook. "The ones who pushed me. They're not coming back, are they?" Caleb studied his son's profile, noting the seriousness in his expression. "No, they're not." Brady nodded, seeming to accept this answer at face value. After a moment, he asked, "Did you make them go away?" The question was deliberately ambiguous, offering Caleb the option to interpret it as he chose. He could provide a sanitized version that preserved Brady's innocence, or he could acknowledge the truth in a way that respected his son's intelligence. "Yes," Caleb replied simply. Brady cast his line into the lake, the lure arcing gracefully before dropping into the water with barely a splash. "Good," he said after a long pause. "They deserved it." The matter-of-fact response caught Caleb by surprise. "Why do you say that?" Brady shrugged his good shoulder. "They came into our house. They hurt me. They were trying to take our land." He looked directly at his father. In nature documentaries, when something threatens the young, the parent eliminates the threat. It's just natural. Caleb recognized the echoes of his own thinking in his son's words. Most people would say humans should operate by different rules. Maybe, Brady conceded, but those men didn't follow the rules either. They chose to be predators. They just picked the wrong target. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Caleb found himself reflecting on Brady's perspective. The boy had processed what had happened through the lens of natural law rather than human legal constructs. There was both wisdom and danger in that viewpoint. Weeks passed. Summer transitioned into early fall. Brady's cast was removed, replaced by a brace he would wear for another month. Tanya completed her move to the city, establishing separate households with a minimum of conflict. The divorce proceedings advanced steadily, the distribution of assets simplified by Caleb's willingness to be generous in financial terms while maintaining sole ownership of their property. Life developed a new rhythm, one that might have continued indefinitely if not for the arrival of Detective Laura Keegan. She appeared at Caleb's office on a Tuesday morning, presenting her credentials and requesting a few minutes of his time. In her early 40s, with intelligent eyes and the composed demeanor of a seasoned investigator, she represented a more sophisticated threat than the local authorities Caleb had anticipated dealing with eventually. State Police, Caleb noted, examining her ID. Special Investigations Unit. What brings you to River Point, Detective Keegan? The unusual circumstances surrounding Russell Mercer's disappearance, she replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. And his associates, and Charles Beaumont's abrupt departure from the region. It's quite the cluster of coincidences. Caleb maintained a neutral expression. I wasn't aware the state had taken an interest in local business matters. We haven't, until recently, Keegan explained. But when 4 men with criminal histories vanish simultaneously, and a prominent businessman abandons millions in investments to relocate across the country, it raises questions. Especially when those events seem connected to allegations of corruption and coercion. I've heard rumors about Mercer's business practices, Caleb acknowledged. But I'm not sure how I can help your investigation. Keegan smiled slightly. I think you're being modest, Mr. Wolf. Your property was central to Mercer's development plans. Your wife was involved with Mercer personally, and your son was injured in what some might see as a rather convenient accident. The implicit accusation hung in the air between them. Caleb neither confirmed nor denied it, instead asking, Have you spoken with my wife? I have, Keegan confirmed. She provided an interesting perspective. According to Mrs. Wolf, she last saw Russell Mercer and his associates at your home, where they were discussing a potential property sale. She left to take your son to the school nurse after his fall, and when she returned hours later, the men were gone and you were alone. That's accurate, Caleb stated. She also mentioned that your son told her he was pushed down the stairs by one of Mercer's associates, Keegan continued. A man named Travis Holt, according to our records. A man with a history of violence who is now missing. Caleb met her gaze steadily. If you're suggesting I had something to do with these disappearances, Detective, I'd point out that speculation isn't evidence. No, it isn't, Keegan agreed. But coincidences can be compelling, especially when they accumulate. Your military background is particularly interesting in this context. I've been a civilian for 15 years, Caleb reminded her. Yes, running a security consulting business. Keegan nodded. A business that keeps your tactical skills quite sharp, I imagine. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, a careful dance of implication and deflection. Keegan was skilled, Caleb noted, intelligent, observant, and persistent without being aggressive. She was building a circumstantial case based on motive, opportunity, and capability, lacking only direct evidence to connect him to the missing men. When she finally rose to leave, she offered a parting observation. You know what fascinates me about this case, Mr. Wolf? The precision of it. 4 men threaten your family, and within hours they vanish without a trace. A powerful businessman pressures you, and suddenly he abandons everything to move across the country. It's almost military in its execution. An interesting theory, Caleb replied, walking her to the door. But as you said, without evidence, theories remain just that. For now, Keegan agreed. I expect we'll be speaking again soon. After she left, Caleb sat at his desk, reassessing the situation with cold logic. Detective Keegan represented a new variable in his calculations, one with the resources, intelligence, and persistence to potentially uncover what he had done. The question was whether to take preemptive action or allow events to unfold naturally. In his former military role, the decision would have been straightforward. Neutralize the threat before it could develop further. But civilian life operated by different rules, and eliminating a state police detective would create more problems than it solved. Instead, Caleb decided on a strategic repositioning. He would accelerate certain plans that had been developing gradually, establishing additional layers of insulation between his actions and any potential investigation. That evening, he discussed the situation with Brady, maintaining transparency about the potential challenges ahead without burdening his son with unnecessary details. A detective came to see me today, he explained as they prepared dinner together. State police, asking questions about Russell Mercer and his associates. Brady's hands stilled momentarily before continuing to chop vegetables. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest she suspects I might be responsible for their disappearance. Brady considered this. Does she have evidence? No, Caleb assured him, and she won't find any. But she's intelligent and determined, which means we need to be prepared for increased scrutiny. What should I do if she wants to talk to me? Brady asked practically. Tell the truth about what happened that day, Caleb advised. About coming home, finding those men there, being pushed down the stairs. About your mother taking you to school instead of the hospital. The detective already knows those details. And if she asks about after, tell her you don't know anything about where those men went, Caleb said. That would be the truth. Brady nodded, accepting this direction. After a moment, he asked, Are we in danger? The question cut to the heart of Caleb's concerns, not for himself, but for his son. Not physical danger, he answered honestly, but there may be legal complications. I've made arrangements to protect you regardless of what happens. These arrangements were already in motion. Earlier that day, Caleb had contacted his lawyer to establish a trust for Brady that would be secure even if Caleb faced legal challenges. He had also reached out to former military colleagues, men who understood the code of protecting family at all costs and who would ensure Brady was supported if necessary. The detective's appearance accelerated Caleb's timeline for another matter as well. The following morning, he visited Sophia Green at her new workplace, a real estate agency in a neighboring town where she had found employment after Beaumont's departure. Mr. Wolf, she greeted him nervously when he appeared at her desk. I didn't expect to see you again. We need to talk, Caleb said quietly. Not here. They met during her lunch break at a small park nearby. Caleb came directly to the point. State police are investigating Mercer's disappearance and Beaumont's departure. A detective named Keegan. She's good at her job. Sophia paled slightly. What does that have to do with me? You provided information about Beaumont's security, Caleb reminded her. Information that could connect you to subsequent events. I never asked what you planned to do with that information, Sophia protested. I just wanted to help after what happened to your son. I understand, Caleb assured her. And I have no intention of mentioning your involvement. But if Keegan is thorough, and I believe she is, she may eventually identify our connection. Sophia wrapped her arms around herself despite the warm day. What should I do? Nothing drastic, Caleb advised. Continue your life as normal. If questioned, acknowledge that you work for Beaumont, but insist your role was strictly professional. The meeting at the pool house never happened. And if they don't believe me, Caleb studied her, assessing her resilience. They have no evidence of that meeting. No electronic trail, no witnesses. It would be your word against a theory, and you have no apparent motive to help me. This was true, but incomplete. Caleb had ensured there was no direct evidence linking Sophia to his actions, but determined investigators sometimes found connections through indirect means. It was a calculated risk, one he had accepted when involving her. I never wanted anyone to get hurt, Sophia said quietly. But after seeing how Beaumont and Russell operated, how they treated people who got in their way, she shook her head. Sometimes I think they got exactly what they deserved. Caleb neither confirmed nor denied this assessment, instead offering practical advice about maintaining normal routines and avoiding suspicious behavior. As they parted ways, he provided a final instruction. If you ever feel unsafe or pressured by the investigation, call this number, day or night. The number belonged to one of his former teammates, a man now working in private security who understood the importance of protecting those who had aided a brother in arms. With these precautions in place, Caleb returned his focus to the detective and her investigation. Rather than avoiding Keegan, he adopted a strategy of limited engagement, answering her questions directly when required, providing information that appeared cooperative without revealing anything substantive. When she returned 3 days later with additional questions, he invited her into his home, offered coffee, and responded to her inquiries with calm precision. Yes, he had been aware of his wife's relationship with Russell Mercer. No, he had not confronted Mercer directly about the affair. Yes, he had been angry about his son's injury, but it focused on Brady's medical care rather than seeking confrontation. Throughout their conversation, Caleb maintained the demeanor of a man with nothing to hide, while revealing nothing of significance. It was a technique he had employed during military debriefings. Acknowledge known facts, provide context without additional detail, and project confident openness that discouraged deeper probing. Keegan, for her part, remained professional but persistent. "Your military record is impressive," she noted at one point. "Special operations, multiple combat deployments. The skills you developed would be quite useful in certain situations. They translate well to civilian security work," Caleb agreed neutrally. "And to other applications, I imagine," Keegan suggested. "Tracking individuals, covert entry, neutralizing threats." Caleb met her gaze steadily. "My military service ended 15 years ago, Detective. I'm a business owner and a father now." "People don't change their fundamental nature," Keegan observed. "They adapt it to new circumstances." "An interesting philosophical perspective," Caleb replied, "but I'm not sure how it relates to your investigation." The detective smiled slightly. "It relates to my understanding of motivation and capability. When a trained operator believes his family is threatened, his response would likely be decisive." The implication was clear, but without evidence, it remained merely supposition. Caleb neither confirmed nor denied her assessment, instead steering the conversation back to factual matters she could verify independently. As weeks passed, the investigation continued but gained little traction. The missing men remained missing, their digital and financial footprints ending abruptly on the day of Brady's injury. Beaumont, contacted by state authorities in Arizona, maintained that his relocation had been purely a business decision, citing market conditions and personal preferences for the sudden move. Without bodies, without witnesses, without physical evidence linking Caleb to the disappearances, Keegan's investigation gradually lost momentum. Her visits became less frequent, her questions more perfunctory, though the sharpness of her gaze never diminished when she studied Caleb. For his part, Caleb continued his measured response to her inquiries while proceeding with his plans. The divorce from Tanya was finalized, with terms favorable enough to ensure her continued silence about what she knew or suspected. Brady's recovery progressed well, both physically and emotionally, his resilience evident in his academic performance and social relationships. Life established a new equilibrium, different from before, but stable in its way. Caleb found unexpected satisfaction in this simplified existence, focused on his son and his business without the complications of a failing marriage or external threats. The only shadow remained Detective Keegan, who continued to orbit their lives like a patient satellite, watching and waiting for some mistake or revelation that might never come. Chapter 8. Reckoning. 6 months after Russell Mercer's disappearance, Detective Laura Keegan arrived at Caleb's door without prior notice. Her expression was grimmer than usual, her manner more formal when he invited her inside. "We found something," she stated without preamble once they were seated in his living room. "At the old iron mine outside of town." Caleb maintained a neutral expression despite the sudden acceleration of his pulse. The mine had been thoroughly secured, the access points disguised and reinforced to prevent accidental discovery. For Keegan to have found evidence there suggested either extraordinary investigative work or a significant oversight on his part. "The mine has been abandoned for decades," he noted calmly. "What were you looking for there?" "We weren't looking specifically," Keegan explained. "A group of college students exploring the area noticed recent activity around one of the sealed shafts. They reported it to local police, who called us given the ongoing investigation." She studied his reaction carefully as she continued. "The shaft had been professionally secured, not the kind of work teenage thrill-seekers would do. When we investigated, we found traces of blood on rocks near the entrance. Preliminary DNA testing matches Perry Dowd, one of Mercer's missing associates. The information was concerning, but not catastrophic. Traces of blood, rather than bodies, suggested the mine itself remained secure. Still, it provided Keegan with the first physical evidence, potentially connecting the missing men to foul play rather than voluntary disappearance. That seems significant, Caleb acknowledged. But I'm not sure why you're telling me. Because we also found boot prints, Keegan replied. High-end tactical boots, size 11. The same type and size you're wearing right now. Caleb glanced down at his footwear. Quality boots he had worn during his security work for years. These are common boots, detective. Available in any outdoor store. True, she conceded. But interesting in context. We also analyzed soil particulates embedded in the tread pattern at the mine. They matched soil samples from your property. This was more problematic. Caleb had been careful to change footwear after the disposal operation, but microscopic evidence was difficult to eliminate completely. I work and live on my property, he pointed out reasonably. Any boots I wear would likely pick up soil from here, and I hike throughout this region regularly. Without establishing when those prints were made, the connection seems tenuous. Keegan nodded, acknowledging the point. Circumstantial, certainly, but it adds to an accumulating pattern. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Wolf, I've been investigating homicides for 17 years. I've learned to recognize when seemingly separate pieces form a larger picture. The picture here suggests that Russell Mercer and his associates threatened your family, hurt your son, and subsequently encountered someone with the skills and determination to ensure they never threatened anyone again. The assessment was accurate, but still lacked definitive proof. Caleb maintained his composed demeanor. That's an interesting theory, detective. But theories aren't evidence. No, Keegan agreed. But they guide where we look for evidence. And we're looking very carefully now. After she left, Caleb conducted a thorough assessment of his position. The blood evidence and boot prints were concerning developments, but far from conclusive. More troubling was Keegan's persistence and methodical approach. She was gradually assembling the components of a case that, while circumstantial, might eventually become compelling enough for prosecution. The rational response would be to eliminate the investigation's momentum, either by discrediting the evidence or by removing Keegan herself from the equation. The former was challenging but potentially achievable. The latter, while technically feasible, would violate Caleb's personal code. Keegan was not a threat to his family, but simply an officer performing her duty. Eliminating her would cross a line he was unwilling to traverse. Instead, Caleb developed a contingency strategy. If the investigation reached a critical threshold where arrest became likely, he would implement an exit plan developed during his initial actions against Russell and his associates. This plan included resources, identities, and secure locations established as insurance against exactly this scenario. But before such measures became necessary, he would attempt a different approach, one that acknowledged Keegan's intelligence while offering a perspective she might not have fully considered. 2 days later, Caleb requested a meeting with the detective at a neutral location, a small park overlooking the lake. When she arrived, he was already seated on a bench, watching the water reflect the afternoon sunlight. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat beside him. "I thought we should talk outside of official channels." Keegan raised an eyebrow. "Are you planning to confess, Mr. Wolf?" "I'm planning to have an honest conversation," Caleb replied. "About perspectives." He gestured toward the lake. "When I was in Special Forces, we operated in environments where conventional law enforcement didn't exist or couldn't function effectively. We made decisions based on clear objectives: protect civilians, eliminate threats, ensure mission success. This isn't a war zone," Keegan pointed out. "We have laws, courts, due process." "Yes," Caleb acknowledged. "Systems designed to deliver justice under ideal circumstances. But systems that can be manipulated, corrupted, or simply overwhelmed by those with enough resources and connections." He turned to face her directly. "Hypothetically, if someone threatened your family, not just with words, but with actions that caused actual harm, what would you do?" "I'd use the legal system," Keegan answered. "File charges, obtain restraining orders, follow procedure. And if that someone had the influence to avoid consequences, if they had demonstrated both the willingness and ability to cause harm despite legal constraints." Keegan didn't answer immediately, her expression thoughtful. "The law doesn't recognize preemptive self-defense, Mr. Wolf. We can't legally act against potential future harm, only respond to immediate threats. That's the limitation of the system, Caleb noted. It often requires victims before it acknowledges predators. For someone trained to identify and neutralize threats before casualties occur, that limitation can seem unacceptable. They sat in silence for a moment, the implication of his words hanging between them. Are you suggesting that Russell Mercer and his associates represented an ongoing threat that couldn't be addressed through legal channels? Keegan finally asked. I'm suggesting that different perspectives lead to different conclusions about appropriate responses, Caleb replied carefully. In some cultures and contexts, a direct response to those who harm family members isn't viewed as criminal, but as necessary and just. Keegan studied him. Justice and vengeance aren't the same thing. Perhaps, Caleb conceded, but they intersect when systems designed for the former fail to protect people from predators. Their conversation continued for another 30 minutes, neither directly addressing the investigation, but instead exploring the philosophical boundaries between legal justice and moral imperatives. Throughout, Caleb maintained the hypothetical nature of their discussion, while Keegan demonstrated a surprisingly nuanced understanding of the ethical complexities involved. As they prepared to part ways, Keegan offered an observation. You know what's interesting about this case, Mr. Wolf? The precision of it. If Russell Mercer and his associates were eliminated, it was done without collateral damage, without public risk, without creating panic. The only people affected were those who had caused harm. Caleb met her gaze. An interesting observation. It suggests someone operating by a code, she continued. Not indiscriminate violence, but targeted action against specific threats. It doesn't make it legal, but it does reflect a certain discipline. She stood to leave. I'm still investigating, Mr. Wolf. That's my job, and I take it seriously. But I understand perspectives better than you might think. The meeting left Caleb with a revised assessment of Detective Keegan. She remained a potential threat to his freedom, but her understanding of his motivations, even if never explicitly acknowledged, suggested she viewed the case with more complexity than simply pursuing a criminal. This impression was reinforced 2 weeks later when Keegan contacted him with an update. The investigation into the mine evidence was being scaled back due to contamination issues that made forensic conclusions unreliable. The boot print evidence, upon further analysis, had proven inconclusive for establishing a definitive timeline or unique identification. While the investigation officially remained open, its momentum had effectively stalled. Whether this resulted from legitimate evidentiary challenges or from Keegan's personal decision to allocate resources elsewhere remained unclear. What was clear was that the immediate threat of arrest had diminished significantly. This development allowed Caleb to focus on rebuilding life with Brady, who had fully recovered physically and was thriving academically. The boy had been accepted into a prestigious marine biology program for the following summer, his passion for ocean ecosystems undiminished by the turmoil of the past year. Tanya had settled into her new life in the city, maintaining regular contact with Brady while keeping a respectful distance from Caleb. Their interactions, when necessary for co-parenting, remained civil but distant. Two people who had once shared everything now connected only by their son. As for Charles Beaumont, he had indeed established himself in Arizona, his business activities there notably more legitimate than his previous ventures. Occasional monitoring suggested he had taken the lessons of his abduction seriously, avoiding any connections to his former associates or business practices in River Point. Life had reached a new equilibrium, one that Caleb found surprisingly satisfying. The property that had been the focus of so much conflict remained in his possession, its value now enhanced by the collapse of the development project that would have transformed the lakefront into a commercial zone. More importantly, Brady was safe and thriving. The threat to his well-being had been eliminated. The consequences for those responsible delivered with the precision and finality that had characterized Caleb's military operations. If there was a price for these actions, in moral terms, in the constant vigilance required to maintain operational security, in a lingering presence of Detective Keegan at the periphery of their lives, it was one Caleb paid willingly. Some debts, after all, could only be settled in blood. Chapter 9. Blood Ties. 1 year to the day after Russell Mercer's disappearance, Caleb received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing a time, date, and the name of a restaurant in the city where Tanya now lived. No signature, no explanation, just those simple details. Caleb considered the possibilities. It could be from Tanya, though the lack of identification seemed unnecessary. It might be from Detective Keegan, whose investigation had gone dormant but never officially closed. Or it could represent a new threat, perhaps connected to Russell's former associates or Beaumont's investors. After careful consideration, Caleb decided to attend the meeting. If it was a trap, he was confident in his ability to identify and avoid it. If it was a legitimate contact, ignoring it might represent a missed opportunity for valuable intelligence. The restaurant was upscale but not ostentatious, located in a renovated warehouse district that had become fashionable in recent years. Caleb arrived 30 minutes early, conducting a thorough assessment of the location, identifying exits, and establishing situational awareness before entering. Inside, he selected a table with clear sight lines to both the entrance and the kitchen, positioning himself with his back to a wall, habits that had become second nature during his military service and remained useful in civilian life. At precisely the appointed time, a woman entered the restaurant. In her early 20s, with dark hair and familiar features, she scanned the room with purpose before her gaze settled on Caleb. Without hesitation, she approached his table. "Mr. Wolf," she greeted him, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. I'm Elise Mercer." The surname immediately triggered Caleb's heightened awareness, though he maintained an outwardly calm demeanor as he gestured for her to be seated. "Russell Mercer's daughter," she explained, confirming his assumption. "I believe you and my father had some unfinished business." Caleb studied her carefully. The physical resemblance to Russell was subtle but present, something in the set of her eyes and the line of her jaw. Her manner was composed, her gaze direct and evaluative. "I knew your father," Caleb acknowledged neutrally. "Though not well. Better than most, I think," Elise replied with a slight smile that held no warmth. "Considering you're the last person to see him alive." The blunt statement hung between them, neither accusation nor question, but simple declaration. Caleb didn't respond immediately, assessing her purpose and potential threat level. "That's an interesting assumption," he finally said. "Your father disappeared a year ago. Many people might have seen him since then." Elise shook her head slightly. "Let's not play games, Mr. Wolf. I've spent the past year investigating my father's disappearance. More thoroughly than the police, I might add. I know about his affair with your wife. I know about his business dealings with Charles Beaumont. I know about what happened to your son." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "And I know my father and his associates visited your home the day they vanished." Caleb maintained his composed expression while recalculating risk assessments. Elise Mercer represented a potential threat, but her approach, direct confrontation in a public setting, suggested her intentions might not be hostile. "Why are we having this conversation?" he asked directly. "Closure," Elise replied. "And information." She leaned forward slightly. "My father wasn't a good man, Mr. Wolf. I've known that since I was 12 years old, and found financial records that showed how he drove my mother's family business into bankruptcy while diverting assets to his own accounts. I've spent most of my life watching him manipulate, threaten, and destroy people who got in his way." This was unexpected. Caleb had anticipated resentment or accusations, not this cold assessment of Russell's character from his own daughter. "If you're aware of his nature, what information are you seeking?" Caleb asked. "Confirmation," Elise said simply. "I need to know for certain that he's gone, not somewhere planning his return or rebuilding his operations, but genuinely gone." The request was reasonable but potentially incriminating. Caleb chose his words with precision. "What makes you think I could provide that confirmation?" "Because you're the only person who had both the motive and the capability to ensure Russell Mercer never threatened anyone again," Elise stated matter-of-factly. "I've researched your background, Mr. Wolf. Your military service, your specialized training, your record in combat operations." She held his gaze steadily. "My father hurt your son. In my experience, That would be unforgivable to someone with your background. The assessment was accurate enough to warrant careful response. If your father is indeed gone, as you suspect, what would you do with that confirmation? Nothing, Elise answered. I have no interest in justice for Russell Mercer. He forfeited any claim to that when he chose to live as he did. She paused, then added, I simply need to know whether I should continue looking over my shoulder for his return, or if I can finally close that chapter of my life and move forward. Caleb considered her request and the risk it represented. Providing explicit confirmation would be an admission of guilt to a murder, unwise even if Elise had no intention of taking the information to authorities. However, her need for certainty was understandable and, in its way, deserved resolution. Your father made choices, Caleb said carefully. Choices that put him in conflict with people who had different priorities than his business interests. People who valued family above property or profit. He held her gaze directly. If I were you, I wouldn't waste any more time looking over my shoulder. The chapter you mentioned is closed. Permanently. Elise studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly, seeming to find the confirmation she sought in his careful phrasing. Thank you for your honesty. Why did you wait a year to have this conversation? Caleb asked, curious about her timing. I needed to be certain about your character before approaching you, she explained. To understand whether you were someone who eliminated my father out of vengeance or protection. The distinction matters to me. And your conclusion? That you're a protector by nature, Elise replied. That what happened to my father and his associates wasn't random violence or excessive retaliation, but the necessary removal of a threat to your family. I can respect that, even if others might view it differently. The assessment was perceptive and largely accurate. Caleb had indeed acted primarily to eliminate a threat rather than to punish its source, though the distinction was perhaps finer than Elise recognized. There's something else you should know, she continued after a moment. My father had other associates, business partners who weren't involved in his day-to-day operations, but who provided financial backing and political connections. People who lost significant investments when his development projects collapsed. This was valuable intelligence that aligned with Caleb's own information. Have these partners shown interest in reviving those projects? Not directly, Elise replied, but they've been making inquiries about property in the region, particularly lakefront parcels, using different proxies this time, more carefully distanced from their actual interests. She reached in her bag and removed a flash drive, placing it on the table between them. This contains everything I've gathered about these individuals, names, corporate entities, financial structures. I thought you might find it useful. Caleb regarded the drive with measured interest. Why provide this to me? Because I've spent my life watching my father destroy people and communities for profit. Elise answered, a hint of intensity breaking through her composed demeanor. I have no intention of allowing his associates to continue that legacy. You've demonstrated both the capability and willingness to stop such operations definitively. The implication was clear. She was providing intelligence not just for Caleb's protection, but with the expectation that he might act against these individuals if they posed a renewed threat. That's a significant assumption about my intentions, Caleb observed. Elise smiled slightly. Is it incorrect? Rather than answering directly, Caleb asked a question of his own. What are your plans now? You mentioned moving forward. I've established a legal consulting practice specializing in identifying and challenging predatory development projects, she explained, using my knowledge of how my father operated to help communities protect themselves through legal channels. It was an interesting symmetry, the daughter using her understanding of the father's methods to oppose rather than advance his type of operations. Caleb found himself respecting her choice. A worthwhile endeavor, he acknowledged, though potentially dangerous if the individuals on this drive discover your activities. I'm aware of the risks, Elise assured him, which is another reason for this meeting. I thought we might establish a mutual understanding, a channel of communication that could be valuable to both of us in the future. The proposal was unexpected but logical. Elise had information networks and legal expertise that complemented Caleb's more direct capabilities. An alliance, however informal, could provide additional security for both parties. A reasonable suggestion, Caleb agreed, pocketing the flash drive. Though any communication would need to be appropriately secure. They spent the next 30 minutes establishing protocols for potential future contact, methods that would be encrypted, deniable, and irregular enough to avoid establishing detectable patterns. Throughout the discussion, Caleb continued to evaluate Elise's reliability and motivations, finding no obvious contradictions or warning signs. As their meeting concluded, Elise offered a final observation. "You know, Mr. Wolf, my father never understood the concept of consequences. He believed his money and connections would always protect him from the natural results of his actions." A common misconception, Caleb noted. Yes, Elise agreed, and a fatal one in his case. I hope his associates prove more perceptive, but if not, she let the implication hang unfinished between them. They parted ways with a handshake and the unspoken understanding that their connection, while unlikely, served mutual interests. Caleb watched her leave, reflecting on the unexpected development. Russell Mercer's daughter had become, in effect, an ally rather than an adversary. Another layer of security for the life he had rebuilt with Brady. On the drive home, Caleb considered the information Elise had provided. If verified, it suggested the need for ongoing vigilance rather than immediate action. The potential threats were still at a distance, evaluating rather than engaging, which provided time for proper assessment and, if necessary, preparation. Brady was waiting when he arrived home, excited about a new development in his college applications. As Caleb listened to his son's enthusiastic explanation of marine research opportunities, he felt the familiar certainty that had guided his actions from the beginning. Protecting this young man was worth any cost, any risk, any moral compromise others might perceive. Some would call it vigilante justice. Others might see it as a father's natural response to threats against his child. The distinction mattered little to Caleb. What mattered was that Brady was safe, thriving, and looking toward a future unburdened by the shadows that had briefly threatened to engulf him. If maintaining that safety required Caleb to continue serving as the unseen guardian against those who would threaten his family, whether Russell Mercer's former associates or others who might emerge in the future, so be it. He had made his choice the moment he'd seen his son lying in that hospital bed, and it was a choice he would never regret. 2 weeks after his meeting with Elise Mercer, Detective Keegan made what would be her final official visit. She arrived unannounced one evening as Caleb was grilling steaks on the deck overlooking the lake. "This is becoming a habit, Detective," he observed, turning a ribeye with practiced precision. "Though usually you call first." "This isn't an official visit," Keegan replied, accepting the beer he offered. "I've been reassigned. State-level task force focusing on political corruption." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Sounds interesting." "It is," she confirmed, "particularly since some of the targets have connections to Charles Beaumont and his former investment partners." The implication wasn't subtle. Keegan was informing him that her new role would focus on the same power structures that had enabled Russell Mercer's operations. "Before I transfer," she continued, "I wanted to inform you personally that the investigation into Russell Mercer's disappearance has been officially classified as inactive due to lack of actionable evidence." Caleb maintained his neutral expression. "I appreciate the courtesy." Keegan studied him for a long moment. "You know what's remarkable about this case, Mr. Wolf? How cleanly it resolved itself. The men who threatened your family disappeared. The corruption they represented was exposed. Your son recovered fully, and not a single innocent person was harmed in the process. A fortunate outcome," Caleb acknowledged carefully. "Fortune seldom works with such precision," Keegan observed. "In my experience, when something appears this clean, it suggests exceptional planning and execution." She finished her beer and set the bottle down. "I never found enough evidence to build a case against you, Mr. Wolf. And to be entirely honest, I'm not entirely sure I wanted to." The admission was unexpected. Caleb regarded her with new interest. "That's an unusual perspective for a detective." "Sometimes the system works," Keegan said, "and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes justice requires alternative approaches." She straightened, her professional demeanor returning. I hope we don't meet again professionally, Mr. Wolf. Take care of your son. As she turned to leave, Caleb asked, would you have made the arrest if you'd found the evidence? Keegan paused, considering the question seriously. I would have done my duty, she finally answered, but I wouldn't have been happy about it. After she departed, Caleb reflected on their exchange while finishing the steaks. Detective Keegan had essentially acknowledged what she believed he had done while simultaneously closing the door on any further investigation. It was, in its way, her own form of justice, recognizing that some predators existed beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement and required different methods of neutralization. Brady joined him on the deck, setting plates and utensils on the outdoor table. At 17, he had grown another 2 inches, his frame filling out with the lean muscle of adolescence. More striking was the confidence in his bearing, the absence of the shadows that had briefly clouded his eyes after the incident with Travis. Who was that? He asked, having glimpsed Keegan's departure from his bedroom window. Detective Keegan, Caleb replied, saying goodbye. She's been reassigned. Brady nodded, absorbing this information. So the case is closed? Inactive, Caleb corrected, but effectively yes. A small smile touched Brady's lips. Good. That means we can finally move forward without looking back. They ate dinner as the sun set over the lake, discussing Brady's upcoming college visits and his summer research program. Ordinary conversation between father and son, unmarked by the extraordinary events that had nearly derailed their lives a year earlier. Later that evening, as Brady worked on homework, Caleb retreated to his office to review the information Elise Mercer had provided. The flash drive contained meticulously organized data on the financial backers behind Russell's operations: names, corporate structures, investment patterns, and personal vulnerabilities. It was professional quality intelligence, suggesting Elise had inherited her father's attention to detail, if not his moral bankruptcy. Of particular interest were documents linking several of these individuals to new property acquisitions in the region through elaborate shell companies. These purchases formed a pattern similar to Russell's earlier activities, strategic properties that, collectively, could support another development project once certain regulatory hurdles were cleared. Caleb studied these materials with clinical detachment, assessing potential threats rather than immediate actions. The investors were being cautious, maintaining multiple layers of separation between themselves and their activities. They had learned from Russell's mistakes, or at least believed they had. For now, they represented a situation to monitor rather than a direct threat requiring elimination. Caleb established a surveillance protocol, utilizing both digital tools and human intelligence from contacts in local government and business. If these individuals crossed the threshold from business operations to personal threats, he would be prepared to respond accordingly. 3 weeks later, Caleb received an unexpected visitor. Tanya arrived on a Sunday afternoon, looking uncomfortable but determined as she stood on the porch of the home they had once shared. "I need to talk to you," she said when he opened the door. "About Brady's graduation." Caleb stepped aside to let her enter, noting that she hesitated before crossing the threshold. The house had become foreign territory to her, a place where she was now an outsider despite having lived there for nearly 2 decades. "Brady's at the library," he informed her, leading the way to the kitchen. "He won't be back for a few hours." "That's probably better," Tanya acknowledged, declining his offer of coffee. "What I have to say is for you anyway." She sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped tightly together. "I've met someone," she announced without preamble. "His name is Dennis. He's an architect I met through work. We're getting married next month." Caleb absorbed this information without visible reaction. "Congratulations." "Thank you," Tanya replied, seeming surprised by his neutral response. "He's a good man. Nothing like." She trailed off, unwilling to speak Russell's name in this house. "Why are you telling me this?" Caleb asked directly. "Our divorce is final. Your personal life is your business." Tanya met his gaze for the first time since entering. "Because Dennis has accepted a position with a firm in Seattle. We'll be moving after the wedding, and I wanted to discuss how that affects my relationship with Brady. The distance would certainly complicate the co-parenting arrangements they had established, though Brady would be leaving for college soon regardless. Still, this represented a significant change in Tanya's involvement in their son's life. Brady will be disappointed, Caleb observed. I know, Tanya acknowledged, regret visible in her expression. But I need a fresh start, Caleb. Somewhere without all these memories, without the constant reminders. The unspoken truth hung between them. Reminders not just of their failed marriage, but of what had happened afterward. The men who had disappeared. The questions that remained officially unanswered, but that Tanya, better than most, could guess at. Brady will understand, Caleb finally said. He's more perceptive than either of us sometimes realize. Tanya nodded, relief evident in the slight relaxation of her shoulders. There's one more thing, she added after a moment. I wanted to apologize. Not just for the affair, but for not protecting Brady that day. For not taking him directly to the hospital. For prioritizing Russell over our son. It was the first time she had acknowledged this failure so directly. Caleb studied her, seeing genuine remorse, but also the self-interest that had always been a fundamental part of her character. Some mistakes can't be undone, he replied evenly. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Tanya flinched slightly at his bluntness. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it before I leave. She stood to depart, hesitating at the door. What you did after? For Brady. I want you to know I understand why. Caleb neither confirmed nor denied her implicit reference to his actions against Russell and his associates. Everything I do is for Brady. I know, Tanya said softly. That's always been the difference between us. After she left, Caleb reflected on her visit and what it represented. Tanya's departure to Seattle with her new husband would create additional distance between her and the events in River Point. Her silence about what she knew or suspected would be further secured by her new life and relationship. It was, from a tactical perspective, an advantageous development. On a personal level, Caleb felt nothing beyond mild satisfaction that this chapter was closing completely. Whatever love he had once felt for Tanya had died long before he had taken action against Russell Mercer. Her betrayal, not just the affair, but the willingness to endanger their son for her own interests, had severed any emotional connection that might have warranted forgiveness. Some acts, once committed, changed the fundamental nature of relationships. Some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. Caleb's capacity for forgiveness, never his most prominent quality, had distinct boundaries. Family safety was the most inviolable of those boundaries. Brady's graduation came in early June, a perfect late spring day with clear skies and mild temperatures. Caleb watched with quiet pride as his son accepted his diploma, graduating with honors and a full scholarship to the marine biology program of his choice. Tanya attended with her fiancé, maintaining appropriate distance from Caleb while focusing her attention on Brady. Afterward, as family and friends gathered at the Wolf home for a celebration, Caleb observed his son moving confidently among his peers, his arm fully healed, his future bright with possibilities that had nearly been derailed a year earlier. Detective Keegan made a brief appearance, offering congratulations to Brady before exchanging a meaningful glance with Caleb, acknowledgement between two people who understood each other's code despite their different perspectives on its application. As the party wound down, Brady found Caleb standing alone on the deck, watching the sunset reflect across the lake. Thanks, Dad, he said simply, joining him at the railing. For everything. The words carried weight beyond the typical graduation gratitude. Both knew what everything encompassed, not just the conventional support of father for his son, but the extraordinary measures Caleb had taken to ensure Brady's safety and future. You never have to thank me for that, Caleb replied, resting a hand briefly on his son's shoulder. It's what fathers do. Brady smiled slightly. Not all fathers. No, Caleb acknowledged. Not all. They stood in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky, the first stars appearing over the water. The home that Russell Mercer and Charles Beaumont had coveted for their development project remained a sanctuary, the land uncompromised by their ambitions. In the months and years that followed, Caleb maintained his security consulting business while keeping a watchful eye on the activities Elise Mercer had identified. The investors behind Russell occasionally tested the waters with property acquisitions or political contributions, but their operations remained distant and cautious, aware, perhaps, that aggressive moves might trigger responses they weren't prepared to face. Brady thrived in college, his occasional visits home bringing life and energy to the house that Caleb otherwise inhabited alone. During one such visit, 3 years after graduation, Brady broached a subject they had tacitly avoided in direct conversation. "I met Russell Mercer's daughter," he said as they worked on Caleb's boat, preparing it for the summer season. "Elise. She gave a lecture on predatory development practices at our environmental law symposium." Caleb continued sanding a rail, his expression neutral. "Interesting. What did you think of her?" "She's smart. Intense," Brady replied, watching his father carefully. "She mentioned meeting you once." "We had a conversation," Caleb confirmed. Brady nodded, processing this information. After a moment, he asked, "The men who hurt me, Russell, Travis, the others, they're never coming back, are they?" It was the most direct question his son had ever asked about the events of that day and their aftermath. Caleb set down his sandpaper and met Brady's gaze directly. "No," he said simply. "They're never coming back." Brady held his father's gaze, understanding the confirmation contained in those few words. "Good," he said quietly. "They made their choice." "Yes," Caleb agreed. "They did." No further discussion was necessary. The bond between father and son included an understanding that some actions, while outside conventional morality, were necessary and justified when family was threatened. Not legal, perhaps, but right in a more fundamental sense that predated legal systems. The primal imperative to protect one's offspring at any cost. Tanya remained in Seattle with her new husband, maintaining occasional contact with Brady, but never returning to River Point. Detective Keegan's corruption task force eventually led to indictments against several of Beaumont's former political allies, though Beaumont himself remained in Arizona, rebuilding his life with a caution born of hard experience. Elise Mercer continued her work opposing predatory development, occasionally sharing information with Caleb when her investigations revealed potential concerns in the River Point region. Their unlikely alliance served mutual interests. Her need to prevent others from following her father's path, and Caleb's determination to protect what he valued from those who would threaten it. Life settled into patterns defined not by the extraordinary events of that year, but by the ordinary rhythms of work, family, and community. Yet beneath these normal routines remained the unspoken reality that Caleb Wolfe had faced a fundamental choice between societal rules and family protection, and had chosen the latter without hesitation or regret. Some might call it vigilante justice. Others would recognize it as the natural response of a predator protecting its offspring. What others called it mattered little to Caleb. What mattered was that his son was safe, his future secure by actions that, while morally complex, had been necessary and decisive. In the end, perhaps Detective Keegan had summarized it best during their final conversation, when she had observed that no innocent person had been harmed in the process. The men who had entered Caleb's home that day had made their choice, crossing a boundary they shouldn't have crossed, threatening what they shouldn't have threatened. For men had entered. None had left alive. And Caleb Wolfe, former Delta Force operator and forever vigilant father, will make the same choice again without hesitation if anyone else ever dared to threaten his family. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Silence. Nathan Carey had always been good at reading rooms. 8 years as a pharmaceutical research analyst had taught him to spot the smallest shifts in body language, the micro expressions that revealed what people were really thinking. So when Dr. Elizabeth Gilmore froze during the ultrasound, her practiced smile evaporating like morning dew, he knew something was catastrophically wrong. The examination room at St. Catherine's Medical Center had been filled with nervous excitement moments before. Nathan held his wife Carol's hand. Carol Patterson Carey, the woman he'd loved since they met at a medical ethics conference 5 years ago. She was a medical ethics consultant, brilliant and compassionate, with auburn hair and eyes that could see through any deception except, apparently, the one growing inside her. "There's the heartbeat," Dr. Gilmore had said initially, her tone routine and reassuring. Then she'd leaned closer to the monitor, her brow furrowing. She adjusted the ultrasound wand, pressed harder against Carol's swollen belly. The rhythmic whooshing of the heartbeat continued, but something in the image had changed the doctor's demeanor entirely. "What is it?" Carol asked, her voice tight with fear. "Is the baby okay?" Dr. Gilmore didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned off the monitor with a deliberate click, removing the wand and setting it aside with trembling hands. She wouldn't meet their eyes. "I need you to go to the hospital's special imaging department right now," she said, her professional mask cracking. "Fourth floor, radiology wing. Ask for Dr. Simon Key. He's expecting unusual cases today." "What did you see?" Nathan demanded, standing up. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered from years of college football and daily gym sessions. But in that moment, he felt powerless. "Doctor, what's wrong with our baby?" Dr. Gilmore finally looked at him, and what Nathan saw in her eyes made his blood run cold. It wasn't just concern, it was pity mixed with something else. Fear. "It wasn't a fetus for sure," she whispered. I've never seen anything like it in 20 years of practice. The structure is all wrong. There's something else there, something that shouldn't be possible." Carol let out a strangled sob. Nathan pulled her close, his mind racing through possibilities. Genetic abnormality? Tumor? Some kind of medical anomaly? But the doctor's reaction suggested something beyond the usual complications. "We're going right now," Nathan said, helping Carol sit up. "But I need you to tell me, is my wife in danger?" Dr. Gilmore hesitated. "I don't know. That's why you need to see Dr. Key immediately. He specializes in unusual cases." 20 minutes later, they were in a different examination room with state-of-the-art imaging equipment. Dr. Simon Key was a thin, nervous man in his 50s with graying hair and hands that never stopped moving. He performed a more detailed ultrasound, then brought up the images on a large monitor. "Mr. and Mrs. Carey," he began, his voice carefully neutral, "your wife is not pregnant." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "That's impossible," Carol said. "I took 4 tests. I have all the symptoms. My belly is distended, yes, but not from a pregnancy." Dr. Key pulled up a series of images. "What you're carrying is a mass. A highly unusual mass that's somehow mimicking pregnancy hormones, creating false positives on standard tests. But it's not biological in origin, at least not entirely." Nathan stared at the screen. The shape was wrong, alien. It looked almost artificial. "What the hell is that?" he asked. Dr. Key's expression darkened. "That's what we need to find out. But Mr. Carey, I have to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. Has your wife been exposed to any experimental drugs or treatments recently? Anything unusual?" Nathan's mind went blank. Then, like a key turning in a lock, a memory surfaced. 3 months ago, Carol had participated in a clinical trial for prenatal vitamins. She'd been so excited about contributing to medical research. The trial had been run by. His blood turned to ice. "Quantum Biosystems," he said slowly. She was in a vitamin trial run by Quantum Biosystems. Dr. Key and his assistant exchanged a look that confirmed Nathan's worst fears. "Mr. Carey," the doctor said carefully, "Quantum Biosystems isn't registered with any legitimate medical research board. We've been tracking reports of their trials for months. Whatever they gave your wife, it wasn't vitamins." Chapter 2. The Ghost of Betrayal. Nathan didn't sleep that night. While Carol rested under sedation at the hospital, he sat in his home office surrounded by 3 monitors, diving deep into Quantum Biosystems. What he found made him wish he'd trusted his instincts years ago. The company had been founded 18 months ago by Rodolfo Black, a name that sent Nathan's heart into his throat. Rodolfo, Rod to his friends, which Nathan had once been. They'd worked together at Meridian Pharmaceuticals 6 years ago, both brilliant researchers with promising futures. Then came the incident that changed everything. Nathan had discovered that Rod was falsifying data in clinical trials, manipulating results to make a failed drug appear successful. The drug was meant to treat postpartum depression, but Rod's falsified data hid dangerous side effects. When Nathan reported him to the FDA, Rod's career imploded. He was fired, blacklisted, and faced criminal charges that were eventually dropped on technicalities. "I'll make you pay for this, Carrie," Rod had screamed during their last confrontation. "You destroyed my life over your precious ethics. One day, I'll destroy something you love." Nathan had dismissed it as the rant of a desperate man. He moved on, met Carol, built a good life. He'd almost forgotten about Rodolfo Black. But Rod hadn't forgotten. At 3 a.m., Nathan's phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered. "Hello, Nathan." The voice was smooth, cultured, dripping with satisfaction. "I've been waiting for this call." "Rod." Nathan's voice was flat, controlled. "What did you do to my wife? What you did to me? I took away her future. Carol wanted children so badly, didn't she? I made sure that will never happen now. The compound we gave her, it's quite elegant, really. Experimental nanotechnology combined with synthetic biology. It's creating a structure in her womb that will require complete removal of her reproductive system. She'll survive, but she'll never carry a child." Nathan's hand tightened on the phone. "Why Carol? She never did anything to you." "Because you love her. Because I wanted you to feel what I felt. The destruction of everything you'd planned, everything you dreamed about. My career, my future family, my reputation, you took it all. Now we're even." "We're not even close to even," Nathan said quietly. "But we will be." Rod laughed. "What are you going to do? Report me again?" Quantum Biosystems is a shell company registered in 3 different countries. By the time anyone traces it, I'll be gone. And Carol? She signed all the waivers. Legally, she consented to experimental treatment. "You're right," Nathan said. "Legal channels won't work. So I guess I'll have to get creative." "Is that a threat?" Rod's voice held a hint of uncertainty. "It's a promise. You should have killed me, Rod. Because now I'm coming for you, and I won't stop until you've lost everything." Nathan hung up. His hand was steady as he opened a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a burner phone. He had resources Rod didn't know about, friendships forged in the darker corners of the pharmaceutical industry, people who operated outside the law when the law failed. He made 3 calls. By dawn, he had a plan. Chapter 3, The Alliance. Carol woke the next morning to find Nathan sitting beside her hospital bed, looking like he hadn't slept, but radiating a cold determination she'd never seen before. "Tell me about Rodolfo Black," she said quietly. Nathan didn't ask how she knew. Carol was brilliant. Of course she'd figured it out. He told her everything, his history with Rod, the phone call, the revenge that had been 6 years in the making. "He did this to me because of you," Carol said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. Yes, they were going to make him pay. Together. Nathan looked at his wife with renewed admiration. Where others might have blamed him, Carol saw the real enemy. It was why he loved her. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow," Nathan said. "Dr. Key says he can remove the mass, but the damage to your reproductive system is extensive. The nanotechnology has integrated with the tissue in ways they've never seen before." Carol's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "Then Rod took something from both of us. What's the plan?" Before Nathan could answer, there was a knock on the door. A woman in her 60s entered, elegant, silver-haired, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She wore an expensive suit and carried herself with authority. "Nathan Carey?" she asked. "I'm Rosemary Lawson. I believe you've been looking for me." Nathan stood. Rosemary Lawson was a legend in pharmaceutical circles, a former FDA director who'd been forced out after exposing corruption at the highest levels. She now ran a private investigation firm specializing in medical fraud. "How did you?" "Dr. Key contacted me last night. When he saw Quantum Biosystems' name, he knew I'd want to know." Rosemary sat down uninvited, pulling out a tablet. I've been tracking Rodolfo Black for 18 months. He's not working alone. She showed them files, photographs, financial records. Rod had partnered with two others, Anthony Delaney, a disgraced surgeon who'd lost his license for performing unauthorized experiments, and Sherry Harrington, a venture capitalist with a history of funding ethically questionable research. They're running 6 different shell companies, Rosemary explained. Quantum Biosystems is just one. They target people, specific individuals they want to hurt, and use them as test subject for experimental technology. Carol isn't their first victim. There are at least 12 others we know of. Why target specific people? Carol asked. That seems inefficient. Because it's not really about the research, Rosemary said. It's about revenge and profit. They choose victims connected to people who've wronged them, then sell the technology to the highest bidder. The suffering is just a bonus. Nathan felt his anger crystallize into something colder, sharper. You want to take them down legally. I want them in prison, Rosemary corrected. But the evidence is scattered across multiple jurisdictions. It would take years to build a case that would stick. Years your wife doesn't have, and years those other victims don't have. So what are you proposing? Rosemary smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. I'm proposing we give Rod and his partners exactly what they deserve. But it needs to be surgical, precise, and permanent. Are you in? Nathan looked at Carol. She nodded. I'm in, Nathan said. But I need to know, why are you helping us? Rosemary's smile faded. Because Rodolfo Black killed my daughter. She was one of his test subjects 3 years ago, before I even knew he existed. By the time I found out, she was dead, and Rod had disappeared. I've been hunting him ever since. The room fell silent. Then Carol spoke. What's the plan? Rosemary opened a new file. First, we need to understand their operation inside and out. Nathan, you're going to do something Rod won't expect. You're going to apply for a job at Quantum Biosystems. Chapter 4. Into the Viper's Nest. Nathan's credentials were impeccable. PhD in pharmaceutical research, 8 years at Meridian, published papers in prestigious journals. When he applied to Quantum Biosystems as a senior researcher, using a carefully crafted resume that omitted his history with Rod, the response came within 24 hours. They wanted him. The Quantum Biosystems facility was a sleek, modern building in a tech park outside the city. Nathan walked through the lobby, his hidden camera disguised as a tie clip recording everything. Rosemary and her team were monitoring from a van 3 blocks away. The interview was conducted by Anthony Delaney himself. The surgeon was in his late 50s, with cold eyes and hands that never stopped moving, a habit Nathan recognized from working with surgeons. Delaney was nervous, despite his professional demeanor. Your resume is impressive, Mr. Carey, Delaney said. But I have to ask, why leave a stable position for a startup? Nathan had prepared for this. Because stable is boring. I've spent years following protocols and regulations. I want to push boundaries, work on cutting-edge research without bureaucratic interference. Delaney's eyes lit up. You're not concerned about ethical considerations? Ethics are important, Nathan said carefully, but they shouldn't prevent progress. Sometimes you have to take risks to achieve breakthroughs. It was exactly what they wanted to hear. By the end of the interview, Nathan had a job offer and a tour of the facility scheduled for the next day. That night, he met with Rosemary and her team. She'd brought in 2 specialists, Henry Cooley, a former NSA hacker who now worked private security, and Jamie Bond, an investigative journalist who'd been building a case against Quantum Biosystems for months. The facility has 3 levels, Rosemary explained, showing blueprints on her screen. Public research labs on the first floor, private labs on the second, and something they call special projects in the basement. That's where they keep the real work. How do I get access? Nathan asked. Henry looked up from his laptop. You don't. Not at first, but I can get us access remotely. During your tour tomorrow, you'll plant 3 devices, signal boosters that will let me hack their network. Once I'm in, we'll own their data. What about physical evidence? Jamie asked. We need samples, documentation, proof that will stand up in court. That comes later, Rosemary said. First, we map their operation. Then we dismantle it piece by piece. Carol appeared in the doorway. She'd been released from the hospital that morning, post-surgery. The doctors had confirmed what they'd feared. Her reproductive system was destroyed. She would never have biological children. But instead of grief, her face showed only determination. "I want in," she said. "I'm a medical ethics consultant. I can apply as a compliance officer." They'd never suspect. "Too dangerous," Nathan said immediately. "Rod took my future," Carol shot back. "I deserve to be part of taking his." Rosemary nodded. "She's right, and she's qualified. It might actually work." Over the next week, Nathan and Carol infiltrated Quantum Biosystems. Nathan planted Henry's devices and began earning trust with small breakthroughs in his assigned projects. Carol, hired as a compliance consultant, gained access to administrative files and HR records. What they found was worse than they'd imagined. Chapter 5. The True Horror. The basement level of Quantum Biosystems was divided into 12 rooms. Each room contained a subject, people who'd been carefully selected and recruited through fake clinical trials, just like Carol. But unlike Carol, these subjects didn't know they were victims until it was too late. Nathan watched the surveillance footage Henry had hacked, his stomach turning. Room 3 held a woman in her 30s, her body riddled with experimental nanobots that were supposed to cure cancer, but instead were eating her alive slowly. Room 7 contained a man whose nervous system had been hijacked by neural implants, leaving him in constant agony. "This is a torture chamber," Carol whispered, watching over Nathan's shoulder. "They're not even pretending to do research anymore." Jamie was documenting everything, her camera recording the evidence. "We have enough to shut them down," she said. "We call the FBI, the FDA, everyone. This ends now." "Not yet," Nathan said coldly. "Rod, Delaney, and Harrington aren't here. They're at an investor presentation in New York. If we move now, they'll run. We need them all in one place. And we need to free these people," Carol added. "They're dying." Rosemary made a decision. "Henry, can you disable the security systems in the basement without triggering alarms? Give me 2 hours. Do it." "Jamie, contact your medical sources. We need ambulances and trauma teams on standby." "Nathan, Carol, you're going to walk out of that building like nothing's wrong. If Rod suspects anything, he'll disappear and we'll never find him." "What about the victims?" Nathan asked. "We're getting them out tonight. But Rod and his partners? They're mine." At midnight, 12 ambulances converged on Quantum Biosystems. Henry had disabled security, and Rosemary's team moved through the basement like ghosts, evacuating the victims. By the time the police arrived, tipped off by an anonymous call, the building was empty except for damning evidence spread across every surface. But there was a problem. As Nathan watched the news coverage the next morning, he realized something was wrong. The story was being suppressed. The victims had been taken to hospitals, but their identities were being hidden. The police investigation was moving slowly, bureaucratically. Someone with power was protecting Quantum Biosystems. His phone rang. "Rod, very clever, Nathan. But you forgot something. Sherry Harrington has friends in very high places. This investigation will die quietly, and we'll rebuild somewhere else. You've won a battle, but the war? You've already lost." Nathan smiled. "You're wrong, Rod. I didn't forget anything. I counted on it." "What? You think you're the only one with connections? While you were busy protecting yourself legally, I was building a different kind of case. Check your email." There was a pause. Then Rod's breathing changed. Nathan had sent him a video, footage of Rod personally administering the compound to Carol during her clinical trial, clearly explaining on camera what it would do. In Rod's arrogance, he'd recorded his revenge to watch later. But Nathan had found the footage on the hack servers. "That's just the start," Nathan continued. "In 30 minutes, that video goes to every major news network, every medical board, and every federal agency, along with evidence of your offshore accounts, your other victims, and detailed documentation of every crime you've committed. Sherry's friends won't be able to stop what's coming." "You bastard." "No, Rod. I'm the man you tried to destroy and failed. Now it's my turn." Chapter 6. The Unraveling. The media storm was spectacular. Within hours, Rodolfo Black's face was on every news channel. The FDA launched an emergency investigation. The FBI raided 4 different quantum biosystems facilities. And Sherry Harrington, seeing the writing on the wall, turned state's evidence against her partners in exchange for a reduced sentence. But Nathan wasn't satisfied. Legal punishment wasn't enough. Not after what Rod had done to Carol, to Rosemary's daughter, to all those victims. He wanted Rod to feel the same helplessness, the same despair. That's when Rosemary revealed her final card. "There's someone you need to meet," she said, leading Nathan and Carol to a secure location. Someone who's been waiting for this moment. In a private medical facility, they met Dr. Simon Key again. But this time, he wasn't alone. He was with a young woman in her 20s, Janelle Farley, a bioengineering prodigy who'd worked for Rod before discovering what he was really doing. "I helped create the compound that hurt your wife," Janelle said quietly. "I didn't know what it was for. Rod told me it was for fertility treatment. When I found out the truth, I tried to leave, but Rod threatened my family. So I stayed and I learned everything about his work." "Why are you here?" Nathan asked. Janelle looked up, and he saw determination in her eyes that matched his own. "Because I know how to reverse the damage. Not all of it. I can't give Mrs. Carey her reproductive system back. But I can neutralize the nanotechnology in her body and the bodies of the other victims. I can give them their lives back." Carol gasped. "You can cure them?" "The technology is reversible." Rod knew that, but he never planned to use the reversal protocol. "I've been working on it in secret for months. With Dr. Key's help, we can start treatments immediately." "What do you need?" Nathan asked. "Access to Rod's research files. The complete data set is encrypted, and only he has the key." Nathan smiled grimly. "Then I guess we need to have another conversation with Rod." Chapter 7. The Trap. Rodolfo Black was in hiding, but Nathan knew him well enough to predict his moves. Rod was arrogant, convinced of his own brilliance. He wouldn't run far. He'd stay close enough to watch Nathan suffer, to see if his revenge would stick even as his empire crumbled. Nathan leaked a false story to the press. Carol's condition was worsening, and doctors had given her weeks to live. It was bait, and Rod took it. The message came through an encrypted channel. "The Carlisle Hotel, room 1407, midnight. Come alone. I'll give you the reversal code for Carol. Last chance at mercy." It was obviously a trap. Nathan went anyway. The Carlisle was a luxury hotel downtown, the kind of place where money bought privacy and discretion. Nathan entered through the lobby, noting the security cameras, the exit routes, the positions of hotel staff. Rosemary's team was scattered throughout the building. Henry in the security office, Jamie posing as a hotel guest, armed operatives in the stairwells. Room 1407 was on the 14th floor. Nathan knocked once. Rod opened the door. He looked haggard, years older than the last time they'd met. But his eyes held the same cruel intelligence. "Nathan." Right on time. Rod stepped aside, gesturing him in. The room was a suite, expensively furnished. Anthony Delaney sat on the couch, a gun resting on the cushion beside him. They'd clearly expected this to go differently. "Where's Harrington?" Nathan asked. "Cutting a deal," the coward Rod said. "But it doesn't matter. She doesn't have what you need. Only I do. The reversal code." "Exactly." Rod poured himself a drink. "Here's my offer. I give you the code, and you drop all charges, retract your testimony, and disappear. Carol lives, and I rebuild somewhere else. Everyone wins, except the other victims." Rod shrugged. "Collateral damage. That's not your problem." Nathan pretended to consider it. "And if I refuse?" Delaney picked up the gun. "Then we kill you here, dump your body, and Carol dies slowly." "I'm a surgeon, Nathan. I know exactly how long she has." "You're bluffing. Killing me doesn't get you out of federal prison." "No," Rod agreed. "But it satisfies me. After what you did to my life, watching you die would be worth it." Nathan looked between them. Two desperate men with nothing left to lose. Dangerous, but predictable. "There's a third option," Nathan said calmly. "Which is, you give me the code, and I don't send the signal." Rod frowned. "What signal?" Nathan pulled out his phone, showing them a simple app with a single red button. 3 minutes ago, when I walked into this room, I armed a device. It's in this building, close enough that if it detonates, this entire floor goes up. The button on my phone is a dead man's switch. If my heart rate stops, or if I press this button, boom, we all die. Delaney stood up, pointing the gun at Nathan's head. You're bluffing. Am I? You know my background, Rod. You know I worked in chemical synthesis before switching to pharmacology. You know I have the knowledge and connections to build something like this. Are you willing to bet your life that I wouldn't? Rod's face went pale. You'd kill yourself just to take us down? After what you did to Carol? In a heartbeat. Nathan's voice was cold, final. Give me the code, Rod, or we all die in the next 60 seconds. The standoff lasted 20 seconds. Then Rod broke. Jesus Christ, fine. He grabbed a laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. The encryption key is a 36-character sequence. I'm sending it to your phone now. Nathan's phone buzzed. He checked the message. It looked legitimate. How do I know this is real? Nathan asked. Because I don't want to die, Rod said bitterly. You win, Nathan. You always win. Take your code and get out. Nathan backed toward the door, phone still visible. You should know there is no bomb. But there are FBI agents surrounding this building, and this entire conversation has been recorded and transmitted to federal prosecutors. Rod's face went from pale to purple. You bastard. The door burst open. FBI agents flooded in, weapons drawn. Delaney tried to raise his gun and was tackled to the ground. Rod just stood there, defeated, as they cuffed him. You can't do this, Rod whispered as they led him past Nathan. After everything, this isn't justice. This is revenge. You're right, Nathan said quietly. It's both. Chapter 8. The Reversal. The encryption key was real. Within hours, Janelle and Dr. Key had accessed Rod's complete research database. The reversal protocol was there, along with detailed documentation of every experiment, every victim, every crime. Over the next 3 weeks, 12 people received treatment. The nanotechnology was neutralized, their bodies beginning the slow process of healing. Some of the damage was permanent, but they were alive, and they were free. Carol underwent the procedure on a Tuesday morning. Nathan held her hand as Janelle administered the reversal compound, a silver liquid that looked innocent but contained the cure Rod had never intended to use. How do you feel? Nathan asked when it was done. Lighter, Carol said, like something poisonous has been removed. She paused. I'll never have children. That doesn't change. I know, but we can adopt. We can foster. We can build a family in other ways. Nathan kissed her forehead. We can. Rosemary visited them that evening. She looked different, softer, somehow. The hunt that had consumed her for 3 years was over. The trial starts in 6 months, she said. Rod, Delaney, and Harrington are all being charged with assault, attempted murder, medical fraud, and about 40 other counts. The prosecutors say it's the strongest case they've seen in years. What about the other companies? Nathan asked. The shell corporations? Being dismantled? The FDA is conducting a global investigation into experimental medical trials. Your testimony has changed the entire industry. After Rosemary left, Carol turned to Nathan. It's really over, isn't it? Almost. What else is there? Nathan pulled out a folder. Inside were documents, photographs, financial records. Rod's assets. The courts are seizing them to pay restitution to the victims. But there's something else. He had a foundation, the Black Research Fund. It was supposed to fund legitimate medical research, but he never funded anything. Just kept the money. And I'm proposing we take it over. Rename it the Lawson Carey Foundation after Rosemary's daughter and us. Use it to fund ethical research, support victims of medical fraud, and prevent anyone else from going through what we did. Carol smiled through tears. Rod would hate that. Exactly. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. The trial of Rodolfo Black became a media sensation. Nathan testified for 6 hours, laying out the entire conspiracy with the precision of a scientist and the passion of a victim. Carol testified about her experience, her lost future, and her determination to ensure no one else suffered the same fate. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Rod received 35 years in federal prison. Delaney got 20. Harrington, who'd cooperated, got 8 years and permanent exile from the medical industry. As they led Rod away in chains, he looked at Nathan one last time. Was it worth it? Rod asked. All this just for revenge? Nathan thought about Carol, about the 12 victims who were healing, about Rosemary, who'd finally found peace, about the foundation that would help thousands more. It wasn't revenge, Nathan said. It was justice. You never understood the difference. 6 months later, the Loss and Carry Foundation opened its doors. Nathan left his position at Meridian to run it full-time, with Carol as the director of ethics oversight. They funded research into reversing experimental medical damage, supported victims of medical fraud, and lobbied for stronger protections in clinical trials. Rosemary joined as an advisor, using her experience to prevent others from suffering as her daughter had. Janelle became their lead researcher, her brilliant mind now focused on healing rather than harm. Dr. Key and Henry both joined the team, along with Jamie, who documented everything and ensured transparency. On the Foundation's 1-year anniversary, Nathan stood in front of a crowd of supporters, donors, and former victims. Carol stood beside him, strong and radiant. A year ago, my wife and I faced the darkest moment of our lives, Nathan began. We were victims of a man's revenge, caught in a conspiracy that nearly destroyed us. But we survived, and more importantly, we made sure that others would survive too. He gestured to the 12 former victims, now healthy and rebuilding their lives. These people are the reason we fight. Not for revenge, not for punishment, but for protection. For justice. For the simple idea that no one should suffer because of another person's cruelty. The crowd applauded. Carol squeezed his hand. That night, alone in their apartment, Nathan and Carol sat on their balcony, watching the city lights. Do you ever think about what we lost? Carol asked quietly. Every day, Nathan admitted. But I also think about what we built. The foundation will help thousands of people. That's a legacy worth having. Rod took our chance at biological children. But in a way, we have hundreds of children now, everyone the foundation helps. Nathan pulled her close. We could still adopt, start our own family, separate from all this. Carol smiled. I'd like that. 3 years later, they adopted twins, a boy and a girl, age 5, who'd been orphaned in a medical malpractice case the foundation had helped resolve. Nathan and Carol named them Hope and Justice, because that's what they represented. Rod remained in prison, his legacy one of cruelty and failure. His name became synonymous with medical fraud, used as a cautionary tale in medical schools worldwide. Nathan's name became synonymous with ethical advocacy and justice. He testified before Congress, helped pass new legislation protecting clinical trial participants, and became a voice for victims everywhere. But his greatest achievement wasn't public recognition or legislative change. It was the quiet moments at home with Carol and their children, building the family Rod had tried to destroy. It was knowing that every day, the foundation helped someone escape the kind of nightmare they'd endured. On the 5th anniversary of Carol's rescue from Quantum Biosystems, Nathan received a letter. It was from one of the victims, a woman named Lauren Ferguson who'd been in room 3 of the basement, dying from experimental nanobots. Dear Mr. Carey, the letter read, I wanted you to know that I got married last week. 5 years ago, I was dying in a nightmare, convinced I'd never see another sunrise. Because of you and your wife, I'm alive. I'm happy. I have a future. You didn't just save my life, you gave it back to me. Thank you. Nathan showed the letter to Carol. She read it, tears streaming down her face. This, she said